The Galactic Council chamber erupts in pandemonium as 5 Eliani princesses simultaneously declare their choice of Stephen Richardson, a human diplomat, as their shared mate and future king of Elian. Council members leap from their seats, mandibles clicking and tentacles flailing in shock and outrage. Stephen stands rooted to the spot, his mind reeling from the unexpected announcement. "This is an outrage," bellows Zaxthor, the Rigelian representative. "Humans have no place in Eliani royalty." Other voices join the cacophony, hurling accusations of human manipulation and deceit. Stephen's eyes dart around the vast chamber, taking in the sea of alien faces contorted with anger and disbelief. He catches sight of Marcus Steele, the human ambassador, pushing through the crowd towards him. Princess Raya, her iridescent scales shimmering under the chamber's harsh lights, steps forward. Silence, her voice, amplified by some unseen technology, cuts through the din. "We have made our choice in accordance with Eliani law and tradition. Stephen Richardson possesses qualities that make him uniquely suited to lead our people into a new era of prosperity and intergalactic cooperation." As Raya speaks, Stephen notices subtle nods and whispers exchanged between certain council members. His diplomat's instincts kick in, sensing a potential conspiracy against human interests. Before he can process this information, Marcus reaches his side. "Stephen," Marcus hisses urgently, "we're in uncharted territory here. Watch your every move. The fate of human-alien relations hangs in the balance." The chamber's energy shields flicker to life with a low hum, sealing everyone inside. The council leader, a towering insectoid creature, raises all 4 of its arms for attention. "We will vote immediately on whether to honor the princess's choice or nullify this unprecedented selection." Security forces move towards Stephen, but Raya and her sisters form a protective circle around him. Their bodies emit a faint, pulsating glow as they invoke an ancient Eliani law. "By the right of the 5 moons," they chant in unison, "we claim our chosen mate. None may interfere." Stephen's mind races, acutely aware that his next actions could reshape the galactic political landscape. He locks eyes with Raya, feeling an unexpected connection that transcends species. In that moment, he realizes that his personal fate has become inexorably intertwined with the future of human-alien relations. The chamber holds its breath as the council leader calls for the vote. Stephen straightens his posture, projecting calm determination despite the turmoil in his gut. He knows that every eye in the room is upon him, judging not just Stephen Richardson the individual, but humanity as a whole. As the voting console lights up, Stephen prepares to face whatever outcome awaits, knowing that this moment will be etched in the annals of both human and Eliani history. The fate of 2 species and humanities standing in the galactic community now rests on his shoulders, and on the unprecedented choice made by 5 alien princesses who saw in him something that no one else in the vast chamber could fathom. As the voting console lit up, Stephen took a deep breath, steeling himself for whatever outcome lay ahead. But before the first vote could be cast, he stepped forward, his voice ringing out clear and strong across the chamber. "Esteemed members of the Galactic Council," he began, his tone measured and diplomatic. "I stand before you today as surprised as any of you by this turn of events. I had no prior knowledge of the Eliani princess's decision, and I assure you that this is not part of any human agenda or manipulation." The chamber fell silent, all eyes fixed on the human diplomat. Stephen continued, his words carefully chosen. "My presence here has always been in service of intergalactic diplomacy and peace. If the princesses see in me qualities that they believe can benefit their people and our galactic community, I am honored. But I also understand the gravity of the situation and the concerns it raises." As he spoke, Stephen noticed a subtle shift in the room. Some council members who had been shouting in outraged moments before now leaned forward, listening intently. He pressed on, emphasizing the potential benefits of a human perspective in Eliani leadership and the opportunities for greater understanding between species. Suddenly, Princess Raya and her sisters moved in unison, forming a circle around Stephen. The air shimmered with an otherworldly energy as they began to chant in an ancient Eliani tongue. Stephen watched in awe as 5 intricate crystal necklaces materialized before him, each pulsing with a different hue. "Stephen Richardson," Raya announced, her voice resonating with ceremonial gravity. "We invoke the ritual of the 5 moons, an ancient Eliani courtship rite. You must accept or reject each of us individually, guided by your heart and mind." The chamber erupted in a fresh wave of murmurs. Stephen's eyes darted to Marcus, who gave him a subtle nod. Understanding the delicate nature of this moment, Stephen squared his shoulders and faced the first princess. As he progressed through the ritual, carefully considering each princess, Stephen found his gaze repeatedly drawn to Raya. Her iridescent scales seemed to shimmer with an inner light, and her eyes held a depth of intelligence that captivated him. When it came time to address her, Stephen felt an unexpected flutter in his chest. "Princess Raya," he said, his voice softening, "your wisdom and grace are evident in every word and action. I am honored by your choice." Before Raya could respond, a commotion erupted from the far side of the chamber. A group of aliens with mottled gray skin and sharp, angular features rose to their feet, their leader pushing through the crowd. "This farce has gone on long enough," the alien leader bellowed, his voice grating and harsh. "I, Commander Vexlora of the Zorthak Imperium, demand that the Council reject this absurd proposal immediately." Vexlora's impassioned speech sent ripples of agreement through the assembled aliens. Stephen watched as several previously undecided council members nodded along with the Zorthak commander's words about maintaining galactic stability. Princess Raya's eyes flashed with anger as she stepped forward to face Vexlora. "You overstep, Commander," she said, her voice cold and sharp. "If you wish to challenge the choice of the 5 moons, then do so properly. I invoke the right of Kylorath, a duel of honor." The chamber fell deathly silent. Vexlora's face contorted in a mixture of rage and fear, but he knew he was trapped. To refuse would be to lose all credibility for the Zorthak. "I accept," Vexlora growled through clenched teeth. As the council members buzzed with excitement at this unexpected turn, Stephen felt a hand on his arm. Marcus pulled him aside, his face grave. "Stephen, listen carefully," Marcus whispered urgently. "I just received an encrypted message from Earth. The Zorthak are planning to manipulate the Eliani succession. Your position here might be our only chance to stop them." Stephen's mind reeled with this new information. He looked back at Raya, who was conferring with her sisters, then at Vexlora, who glared at him with undisguised hatred. The weight of the situation pressed down on him. His actions here would affect not just his own fate, but potentially the balance of power in the entire galaxy. As Eliani royal guards began to transform the council chamber into an arena for the impending duel, erecting shimmering force fields to protect the spectators, Stephen watched Raya with growing concern. She stood tall and confident, but Vexlora's muscular frame and predatory stance spoke of a formidable fighter. The guards approached, bearing 2 identical staffs that crackled with vibrant energy. Stephen knew he had to make a decision. Should he allow Raya to fight on his behalf, risking her safety but potentially cementing the Eliani alliance? Or should he step forward and take her place, put himself in danger but demonstrating his commitment to his potential new role? Time seemed to slow as Stephen weighed his options, acutely aware that every eye in the chamber was upon him. The fate of human-alien relations, the Eliani succession, and the threat of Zorthak manipulation all hung in the balance. As the guards prepared to hand over the energy staffs, Stephen knew his next move would shape the course of galactic history. Stephen felt a surge of protective instinct course through his body. He couldn't stand by and watch Raya risk her life for him. In that moment, a fragment of Eliani law he had studied during his diplomatic preparation flashed through his mind. "Wait!" Stephen's voice rang out, halting the proceedings. All eyes turned to him as he stepped forward, his heart pounding. "I invoke the right of substitution. As Princess Raya's chosen mate, I claim the right to take her place in this duel." A collective gasp rippled through the chamber. Raya's eyes widened in surprise, a mix of concern and admiration flickering across her face. Vexlor's lips curled into a sneer, his angular features twisting with disdain. "You dare?" the Zorthak commander growled. "A human, untrained in our ways, presumes to face me in combat?" Stephen met Vexlor's gaze steadily. "I do." The council leader conferred briefly with his advisors, then nodded. "The right of substitution is valid. Stephen Richardson will represent the Eliani princesses in this duel." As Stephen took the energy staff from the guard, he felt its unfamiliar weight and balance. The weapon hummed with power, sending tingles through his palm. Across the makeshift arena, Vexlor twirled his staff with practiced ease, a predatory gleam in his eyes. The duel began without preamble. Vexlor launched into a series of lightning-fast strikes, the air crackling with each swing of his staff. Stephen, relying on his human reflexes, barely managed to dodge and parry the initial onslaught. The Zorthak's superior technique was immediately apparent, and Stephen found himself constantly on the defensive. As he struggled to find an opening, Stephen caught sight of Marcus Steele watching intently from the sidelines. The ambassador's eyes narrowed, studying Vexlor's movements. Suddenly, Marcus made a subtle gesture, pointing out a pattern in the Zorthak's footwork. Stephen's diplomatic training kicked in, his mind racing to interpret Marcus's signal. He realized that Vexlor's fighting style, while impressive, had a rhythm to it, a rhythm that could be disrupted. Seizing the opportunity, Stephen broke from the traditional defensive stance and incorporated a series of unpredictable, distinctly human movements. He feinted left, then dropped low, sweeping his staff in a wide arc that caught Vexlor off guard. The Zorthak commander stumbled, his rhythm broken. For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. The chamber buzzed with excitement as the tide of the battle began to shift. Energy crackled and sparked as the two combatants clashed, their staffs meeting in brilliant explosions of light. Each impact sent shockwaves through the arena, causing the protective force fields to shimmer and flex. From the sidelines, Princess Raya and her sisters watched with rapt attention. Their crystal necklaces pulsed in sync with the energy surges, casting an ethereal glow around them. Stephen felt their silent support buoying him, lending him strength as he pushed his body to its limits. Vexlor, growing increasingly frustrated, intensified his assault. His attacks became more vicious, more desperate. In a moment of blind rage, he channeled excess energy through his staff, a move strictly forbidden by the duel's rules. The council chamber erupted in shocked outcry, but before anyone could intervene, Stephen's instincts took over. He pivoted, catching Vexlor's overcharged attack with the tip of his own staff. In a move that defied the laws of physics as the aliens understood them, Stephen redirected the energy back at his opponent. A blinding flash filled the chamber, followed by a thunderous boom. When the light faded and the dust settled, Stephen found himself sprawled on the ground, every muscle in his body screaming in protest. Through blurred vision, he saw Vexlor lying motionless across the arena, his shattered staff scattered around him. Silence fell over the chamber as Stephen struggled to his feet, leaning heavily on his staff for support. The council leader's voice cut through the tension. Commander Vexlor is disqualified for use of forbidden techniques. The victory goes to Stephen Richardson. A cacophony of cheers and protests erupted from the assembled aliens. Medical teams rushed forward, attending to both Stephen and the unconscious Zorthak commander. As a team of Eliani healers surrounded him, Stephen felt a gentle touch on his arm. He turned to find Princess Raya at his side, her iridescent scales shimmering with concern. "You fought bravely," she said softly, her hands glowing with healing energy as she tended to his wounds. "But why did you take my place?" Before Stephen could respond, Marcus Steele appeared, his face a mixture of pride and urgency. "Well fought, Stephen, but this is not nearly finished. The Council is calling for a recess to deliberate, and I've picked up some chatter about the Zorthak plot. We need to move quickly." As Raya's healing touch soothed his battered body, Stephen watched Vexlora being escorted to a secure chamber for a private audience with Council leadership. The Zorthak commander's eyes met Stephen's for a brief moment, filled with a cold fury that sent a chill down the human diplomat's spine. Stephen knew that his victory in the arena was just the beginning. The real battle, one of politics, diplomacy, and potentially the fate of multiple species, was about to unfold in the Council chambers. As he prepared to face this new challenge, he couldn't shake the feeling that unseen forces were moving against them, their motives as yet unknown. Little did Stephen know that high above the Eliani homeworld, cloaked in the inky blackness of space, a Zorthak vessel silently entered the system. On its bridge, Captain Krelnax received an encrypted transmission from within the Council chamber itself, setting in motion a plan that would shake the foundations of the galactic order. As the Zorthak vessel slipped silently into the system, the Council chamber erupted into a flurry of activity. Alarms blared, their piercing wails cutting through the tense atmosphere. Security officers rushed into the room, their faces etched with urgency. "High Minister Zalthor," one of the officers reported, his voice strained, "a Zorthak vessel has breached our outer defenses. Their stealth systems nearly masked their approach, but we detected them on the edge of Eliani space." The chamber descended into chaos. Delegates leapt to their feet, shouting accusations and demanding explanations. Some pointed fingers at the human delegation, while others cast suspicious glances at the Zorthak representatives. Stephen Richardson, still recovering from his duel with Vexlora, scanned the room. His eyes narrowed as he caught sight of the Zorthak commander. Vexlora's hand moved subtly towards his uniform, and Stephen's instincts kicked into overdrive. Without hesitation, Stephen launched himself across the chamber. He collided with Vexlora, sending them both tumbling to the ground. They grappled fiercely, Stephen's human strength matching the Zorthak's alien physiology. "The device," Stephen shouted, wrestling with Vexlora's arm. "He's activating something." Princess Raya reacted instantly. Her iridescent scales flashed as she moved with lightning speed, neutralizing Vexlora's bodyguards before they could intervene. Her combat training was evident in every precise movement, each strike calculated and effective. Stephen finally wrenched the small device from Vexlora's grasp. He held it up triumphantly, his breath coming in short gasps. "Ambassador Steele, I think this is what you were warning me about." Marcus Steele stepped forward, his face grim. He addressed the Council, his voice carrying across the din of the chamber. "Esteemed delegates, we have uncovered evidence of a Zorthak plot to manipulate the Eliani succession. This device is proof of Commander Vexlora's involvement in a larger conspiracy." As security forces moved to detain Vexlora and his allies, the chamber's view screens flickered to life. The approaching Zorthak vessel loomed large, its sleek design a stark contrast to the organic curves of Eliani architecture. The ship effortlessly evaded the first volley from Eliani defense systems, its advanced technology giving it a clear advantage. "They're launching assault craft," an Eliani officer announced, her voice tight with tension. "They're headed straight for the Council building." Stephen's mind raced, processing the unfolding crisis. His gaze fell on the energy staff he had used in the duel, and an idea began to form. He turned to Princess Raya, his eyes alight with willpower. "The staffs," he said urgently. "We can use them to create a shield around the chamber. But we'll need your help, you and your sisters." Raya nodded, understanding immediately. She gathered her sisters, their crystal necklaces pulsing with energy. Stephen coordinated with Eliani security, explaining his plan rapidly as they worked to position the staffs. The princesses formed a circle around the chamber, their necklaces glowing with increasing intensity. Stephen stood at the center, drawing on his experience from the duel to stabilize the energy flow. The air crackled with power as a shimmering barrier materialized, enveloping the council chamber. Outside, the first wave of Zorthak attackers slammed against the shield, their weapons discharging harmlessly against the energy barrier. The council members watched in awe as the human diplomat and Eliani princesses worked in perfect synchronization, their combined efforts creating an impenetrable defense. Ambassador Steele seized the moment, addressing the council once more. Earth stands ready to assist. Our fleet is stationed at the edge of Eliani space. With your permission, we can provide immediate support against this Zorthak incursion. As the council deliberated, Stephen's mind was already racing ahead. He knew the energy shield couldn't be maintained indefinitely. They needed a way to strike back, to end this threat decisively. "We need to take the fight to them," Stephen announced, his voice carrying across the chamber. "I propose leading a small team to infiltrate their command ship. We can use one of their captured assault craft to slip past their defenses." Princess Raya stepped forward, her scales shimmering with tenacity. "I will accompany you. My knowledge of Eliani technology and combat skills will be invaluable." The council members exchanged glances, weighing their options. Finally, High Minister Zalthor nodded gravely. "We have little choice. Proceed with your plan, Stephen Richardson. The fate of the Eliani kingdom rests in your hands." As preparations for the mission began in earnest, Stephen and Raya found a moment of relative quiet. They stood close, the weight of their task hanging heavy between them. "Stephen," Raya said softly, her multifaceted eyes searching his face. "What you've done for us, for me. I never expected to find such courage in an off-worlder." Stephen's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining. "I never expected to find someone like you among the stars," he replied, his voice husky with emotion. Their lips met in a passionate kiss, the chaos of the impending battle fading away for a brief, precious moment. When they parted, both wore expressions of fierce persistence. "Let's end this," Stephen said, reaching for his combat gear. Raya nodded, her scales rippling with anticipation. Together, as they made final preparations for their perilous mission, the sounds of battle echoed from beyond the energy shield. The fate of multiple worlds hung in the balance, with Stephen and Raya standing at the center of the storm. They boarded the captured Zorthak assault craft, ready to take the fight directly to the heart of the enemy. Enemy's command vessel. As the craft's hatch sealed behind them, Stephen took a deep breath, his hands gripping the unfamiliar controls. "Ready?" he asked, glancing at Raya and Ambassador Steele. Before they could respond, an Eliani technician rushed up to the craft, waving frantically. "Wait," he called out, his voice muffled through the hull. "We have something that might help." Stephen hesitated, then reopened the hatch. The technician hurried inside, clutching a small device. "We salvaged this from Vexlor's equipment," he explained breathlessly. "It's a Zorthak cloaking device. We've integrated it into the craft systems." Stephen's eyes widened. That could be a game changer. "Thank you." As the technician exited, Ambassador Steele stepped forward. "I'm coming with you," he announced firmly. Raya opened her mouth to protest, but Steele held up a hand. "My diplomatic experience could be crucial if we encounter Zorthak leadership. This isn't just a military operation. It's a political minefield." Stephen nodded, recognizing the wisdom in Steele's words. "All right, Ambassador. Welcome aboard." With the team assembled, Stephen initiated the launch sequence. The assault craft hummed to life, its alien technology responding to his touch with surprising ease. As they lifted off, Stephen activated the cloaking device, enveloping the ship in a shimmering field of energy. Outside, the battle raged on. The energy shield maintained by Raya's sisters flickered under the relentless Zorthak assault. Stephen guided their craft through a narrow gap in the enemy forces, his heart pounding as they narrowly avoided detection. As they approached the massive Zorthak command ship, Stephen's comlink crackled to life. "Unidentified craft, you are entering restricted airspace," a gruff voice warned. "Identify yourself immediately or face destruction." Stephen exchanged worried glances with his companions. The cloaking device should have prevented detection. Something was wrong. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the Zorthak ship. Their cloaking device flickered and failed, leaving them exposed. "They've got some kind of advanced sensor array," Raya exclaimed, her scales rippling with agitation. "Our cloak can't fool it." Stephen's mind raced. They were seconds away from being blown out of the sky. With no time for hesitation, he made a split-second decision. "Hold on," he shouted, cutting power to all non-essential systems. The craft went dark, save for the faint glow of emergency lighting. Using the Zorthak ship's own gravitational field, Stephen executed a daring slingshot maneuver. The assault craft accelerated rapidly, streaking towards the closing docking bay doors. "Stephen, what are you dash?" Ambassador Steele's question was cut short as they crashed through the narrowing gap, metal screeching against metal. The craft skidded across the docking bay floor, coming to a jarring halt against a stack of cargo containers. Smoke filled the cabin, but miraculously, they were all relatively unharmed. "Everyone out," Stephen ordered, coughing as he fumbled with his harness. "We don't have much time." They scrambled from the wreckage, the sound of Zorthak security forces echoing through the corridors beyond. Raya sprinted to a nearby control panel, her fingers dancing across the alien interface. "I can seal the docking bay doors," she said, her voice tight with concentration. "But it won't hold them for long." As the massive doors groaned shut, Stephen scanned their surroundings. His eyes fell on a small maintenance hatch near the far wall. "There," he pointed. "That could be our way in." They rushed towards the hatch, the sound of Zorthak's soldiers attempting to breach the sealed doors growing louder with each passing second. Ambassador Steele reached into his pocket, producing a small, cylindrical device. "A jamming unit," he explained, noticing their curious looks. "It should disrupt their communications and security systems." "I always come prepared." Stephen nodded appreciatively as he wrenched open the maintenance hatch. "Nice work, Ambassador. That could buy us some valuable time." As they squeezed into the narrow maintenance shaft, the docking bay doors finally gave way with a thunderous crash. Zorthak's soldiers poured in, their shouts echoing through the ship. The trio crawled through the cramped space, guided by Raya's intuitive understanding of alien technology. They navigated a maze of twisting corridors, narrowly avoiding detection by several Zorthak patrols. As they neared what Raya believed to be the central control room, they overheard a conversation that made their blood run cold. "The plan is proceeding as expected, Captain Krelnax," a voice said, its tone smug and self-assured. "With the Eliani succession in chaos, our allies on the Galactic Council will push for increased Zorthak influence in the sector." Stephen exchanged shocked glances with Raya and Ambassador Steele. The conspiracy ran deeper than they had imagined, implicating high-ranking officials across multiple alien races. "We need to gather more evidence," Steele whispered urgently. "This could reshape the entire political landscape of the galaxy." Before they could decide on their next move, the ship lurched violently, nearly dislodging them from their precarious position in the maintenance shaft. Stephen crawled to a nearby viewport, his eyes widening at the sight before him. A massive Terran battlecruiser had entered the Eliani system, its weapons primed and targeting the Zorthak command ship. The human fleet had arrived, dramatically altering the balance of power in the ongoing conflict. "We're out of time," Stephen said, his voice tight with urgency. "We need to make a decision now. Do we head for the engine room and try to disable the ship, or push on to the control room and gather more evidence?" The fate of multiple worlds hung in the balance as Stephen, Raya, and Ambassador Steele faced this crucial decision. The next few moments would determine not only the outcome of their mission, but potentially the future of galactic politics itself. Stephen's eyes darted between his companions, weighing their options. The ship's violent lurch had made their predicament even more precarious. "We push on to the control room," he whispered, his decision firm. "The evidence we could gather there might be our only chance to end this conflict for good." Raya nodded, her scales shimmering with approval. Ambassador Steele's expression was grim, but determined. They continued through the cramped maintenance shaft, the sounds of chaos echoing through the ship's hull. As they approached the junction, voices drifted up from below. Stephen held up a hand, signaling for silence. 3 Zorthak engineers appeared, their attention focused on a malfunctioning panel. In a flurry of movement, Stephen and Raya sprung into action. Stephen's military training kicked in as he executed a precise takedown, while Raya's natural agility allowed her to incapacitate the second engineer before he could raise an alarm. Ambassador Steele, surprising both his companions, smoothly disabled the third with a well-placed nerve strike. "I picked up a few things in my years of service," Steele explained, noticing their shocked expressions. Wasting no time, they stripped the unconscious engineers of their uniforms and donned the alien garments. The fit was awkward, especially for Raya, but it would have to do. Disguised as Zorthak crew members, they made their way to the control room. The ship's corridors were a hive of activity, with crew members rushing to battle stations. Their stolen uniforms allowed them to move through the chaos undetected. As they approached the control room, raised voices could be heard from within. Stephen pressed his ear to the door, his eyes widening as he listened. "You promised me control, Zalthor," a gravelly voice shouted. "The Eliani were supposed to fall easily." "Patience, Captain Krelnax," a familiar voice replied. "High Minister Zalthor of the Eliani. Our allies on the Galactic Council are already moving to increase Zorthak influence in the sector. This minor setback changes nothing." Stephen exchanged a shocked glance with Raya. The betrayal ran deeper than they could have imagined. He nodded to Ambassador Steele, who activated the jamming device. The effect was immediate. Alarms blared throughout the ship as its internal systems were disrupted. Taking advantage of the confusion, they burst into the control room. Raya made a beeline for the main computer terminal, her fingers flying across the alien interface as she began downloading crucial data. Stephen and Ambassador Steele moved swiftly to secure the room. The Zorthak crew, caught off guard by the sudden intrusion and the malfunctioning systems, were quickly subdued using non-lethal tactics. Captain Krelnax, a towering figure with mottled gray skin, whirled to face the intruders. Recognition flashed in his eyes as he took in Stephen's ill-fitting uniform. "You!" he snarled, lunging for a nearby control panel. Stephen intercepted him, tackling the Zorthak captain to the ground. They grappled fiercely, Krelnax's superior strength nearly overwhelming Stephen. But years of training had honed Stephen's reflexes and adaptability. As they fought, Raya worked feverishly at the computer terminal. "He's trying to activate the self-destruct sequence," she called out, her voice tight with concentration. Ambassador Steele, meanwhile, had cornered a group of Zorthak crew members. "Your leaders have deceived you," he said, his voice carrying the weight of his years of diplomatic experience. "We have evidence of their conspiracy. Stand down now, and you'll be treated fairly when this is over." Confusion and doubt flickered across the aliens' faces. Slowly, one by one, they lowered their weapons. Stephen and Krelnax continued their brutal struggle. The Zorthak captain landed a crushing blow to Stephen's ribs, causing him to gasp in pain. But as Krellnax moved to press his advantage, Stephen used the alien's momentum against him, flipping him onto his back. "It's over, Krellnax," Stephen panted, pinning the captain to the ground. A triumphant cry from Raya confirmed his words. "Self-destruct sequence aborted," she announced. "And I've got the data we need." With the control room secured, Stephen made his way to the communication console. He established a link with the human battlecruiser that had entered the system. "This is Stephen Richardson," he said, his voice steady despite his ragged breathing. "We've captured the Zorthak command ship, requesting immediate assistance and coordination for a synchronized attack on the remaining Zorthak forces." The response was immediate. "Understood, Mr. Richardson. This is Admiral Elena Blackwood. We're moving into position now." Stephen relayed tactical information to the Admiral, coordinating the human fleet's movements with the Eliani defenses. The combined assault quickly overwhelmed the remaining Zorthak ships, their formation crumbling without guidance from their captured command vessel. As the battle outside subsided, Stephen turned to Raya and Ambassador Steele. "We need to broadcast the evidence," he said. "The whole galaxy needs to know the truth." Raya nodded, interfacing once more with the ship systems. Within moments, the data they had gathered proof of the conspiracy involving high-sistered galactic media channels. The control room fell silent as they waited for the fallout. It wasn't long in coming. The ship's communication systems lit up with incoming transmissions from dozens of worlds, all demanding explanations and action. The sound of heavy boots in the corridor outside broke the tension. Admiral Blackwood strode into the control room, flanked by a squad of human marines. Her eyes swept the room, taking in the subdued Zorthak crew, the battered but triumphant infiltration team, and the wealth of alien technology surrounding them. "Impressive work," she said, her tone crisp and professional. "We'll take it from here. Mr. Richardson, Princess Raya, Ambassador Steele, your presence is requested for debriefing." As the Marines began securing the room and processing prisoners, Stephen found himself drawn to Raya. Their eyes met, a wealth of unspoken emotions passing between them. The intensity of their shared ordeal had forged a connection deeper than either had anticipated. They moved toward each other, drawn by an irresistible force. Stephen's hand found Raya's, their fingers intertwining. For a moment, the chaos around them faded away. Their moment of privacy was short-lived. The doors to the control room hissed open once more, admitting Raya's sisters. The 4 Eliani princesses rushed to embrace their sibling, their scales shimmering with relief and excitement. "Raya," the eldest called out, "we've been so worried. The council is in an uproar over the broadcast." Raya reluctantly pulled away from Stephen, turning to face her sisters. "There's so much to tell you," she said. "But first, we need to interface with the ship systems. There may be more layers to this conspiracy that we haven't uncovered yet." As the Eliani princesses began to work their unique abilities on the Zorthak technology, Stephen found himself pulled aside by Admiral Blackwood. "Earth's government is requesting your immediate presence for an emergency briefing," she informed him. "Your actions here have put you in a position of significant influence, Mr. Richardson. I hope you're prepared for what comes next." Stephen nodded, the weight of responsibility settling heavily on his shoulders. He glanced at Raya, still deep in concentration, as she interfaced with her sisters and the alien technology. "Admiral," he said, "I'd like to request that Princess Raya be invited to join us for the briefing. Her insights will be invaluable." Blackwood considered for a moment, then nodded. "Agreed. We'll make the necessary arrangements." As preparations began for their journey to Earth, Stephen's mind raced with the implications of all that had transpired. The captured Zorthak ship, now under joint human and Eliani control, would yield technological insights beyond their wildest dreams. But it also presented new challenges. There was no telling how many of the remaining crew might still pose a threat, or what other secrets the ship might hold. He watched as Raya and her sisters worked, their movements synchronized as they delved deeper into the Zorthak systems. The future was uncertain, filled with both promise and peril. But whatever challenges lay ahead, Stephen knew one thing for certain. He and Raya would face them together. Together, as they prepared to depart the Zorthak command ship, Stephen's gaze lingered on Raya, a mix of emotions swirling within him. The journey back to the Eliani homeworld was anything but uneventful. Admiral Blackwood, recognizing the gravity of the situation, swiftly organized an impromptu diplomatic summit aboard her battlecruiser. The cavernous war room, typically used for strategic planning, now buzzed with the voices of diverse alien delegates. Stephen found himself at the center of attention as he entered the room, flanked by Raya and Ambassador Steele, representatives from the Eliani Royal Council, their iridescent scales shimmering under the harsh lights, nodded respectfully. Human diplomats, their crisp uniforms a stark contrast to the varied alien attire, watched him with keen interest. Admiral Blackwood's voice cut through the murmur of conversation. "Ladies and gentlemen, we face an unprecedented situation. The conspiracy we've uncovered threatens the stability of the entire galaxy. Mr. Richardson, please brief us on the latest developments." Stephen stepped forward, acutely aware of the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. He detailed the events aboard the Zorthak ship, careful to emphasize the collaborative effort that led to their success. As he spoke, he noticed the reactions of the assembled delegates. Some nodded approvingly, while others whispered among themselves, casting wary glances his way. It was clear that his unique position, a human who had earned the trust of the Eliani royalty, was a source of both respect and concern. An Eliani counselor, his scales a deep blue, raised a hand. "Mr. Richardson, your actions have undoubtedly averted a crisis. However, we must consider the implications of increased human involvement in galactic affairs. How can we be assured that Earth's interests align with those of the wider galactic community?" Before Stephen could respond, Raya stepped forward. "Counselor, if I may, Mr. Richardson's actions demonstrate the potential of human Eliani cooperation. His quick thinking, combined with our technology, allowed us to overcome challenges that neither of our species could have faced alone." The room fell silent as the delegates considered her words. Stephen felt a surge of gratitude towards Raya, impressed by her diplomatic skill. The summit continued, with discussions ranging from immediate security concerns to long-term strategies for maintaining galactic stability. As the hours wore on, Stephen found his mind drifting to the Zorthak command ship, where Raya's sisters continued their work. Suddenly, the doors to the war room burst open. An aide rushed in, her face pale. "Admiral Blackwood, we have an urgent situation aboard the Zorthak vessel." Stephen's heart raced as he followed the Admiral and a team of security personnel back to the captured ship. The scene that greeted them was one of chaos. Alarms blared, and the air crackled with energy discharges. "Several detained crew members have escaped," a harried officer reported. "They're attempting to access critical systems." Without hesitation, Stephen stepped forward. "I know the layout of the ship. Let me lead a team to subdue them." Admiral Blackwood nodded sharply. "Do it, but be careful, Richardson. We can't afford to lose you." Stephen assembled a small team of human and Eliani security personnel. As they moved through the ship's winding corridors, he briefed them on Zorthak tactics and vulnerabilities. They encountered the first group of escapees near the engine room. Stephen's team moved with precision, using non-lethal force to subdue the Zorthak crew members. But as they secured the area, Stephen noticed a lone figure slipping away towards the power core. "You two with me," he ordered, giving chase. The figure led them on a winding path through maintenance shafts and rarely used corridors. As they emerged into the power core chamber, Stephen caught a glimpse of their quarry, a lithe, reptilian alien with mottled gray skin. "Stop!" Stephen called out, raising his weapon. The alien turned, a cruel smile playing across its features. "Ah, the human who thinks he understands our ways. How naive." With lightning speed, the alien activated a device on its wrist. The ship systems began to whine ominously, displays flashing with warning signals. "Who are you?" Stephen demanded, keeping his weapon trained on the alien. "I am Vexlora, agent of the Concordat, and you, human, have interfered in matters beyond your comprehension." The name sent a chill down Stephen's spine. He had heard whispers of the Concordat during the summit, a shadowy organization suspected of manipulating galactic events from the shadows. Before Stephen could react, Vexlora lunged for a nearby control panel. Energy arced between the alien's fingers and the ship systems, causing the power core to pulse erratically. "The Concordat's plans will not be so easily thwarted," Vexlora hissed. "This ship and all aboard will be reduced to atoms." Stephen's mind raced. He knew he couldn't hope to understand the alien technology in time to stop the overload. But perhaps, "Raya," he called into his communicator, "I need you in the power core now." Seconds ticked by as Stephen and his team struggled to subdue Vexlora. The alien's strength and agility were unlike anything Stephen had encountered before. Just as the power core's whine reached a fever pitch, Raya burst into the chamber. Her eyes widened as she took in the scene. "The systems are overloading," Stephen shouted over the din. "Can you interface with them?" Raya nodded, her expression set with commitment. She placed her hands on the nearest control panel, her scales beginning to glow with an inner light. As Raya worked to stabilize the ship systems, Stephen redoubled his efforts to neutralize Vexlora. The Concordat agent fought with the desperation of one who knew failure meant certain death. In a fluid motion, Stephen feinted left, then dropped low, sweeping Vexlora's legs out from under him. The alien crashed to the ground, momentarily stunned. "Now!" Stephen yelled to his team. They moved in swiftly, securing Vexlora with energy restraints. With the immediate threat neutralized, Stephen turned his attention to Raya. Her face was a mask of concentration, sweat beading on her brow as she interfaced with the alien technology. "Talk to me, Raya," Stephen said urgently. "What do you need?" "The overload sequence is complex," she replied, her voice strained. "I can slow it, but I can't stop it alone." Stephen's eyes darted around the chamber, taking in the various control panels and energy conduits. An idea began to form. "If we reroute the excess energy through the secondary systems," he mused aloud, "we might be able to bleed off enough power to prevent a catastrophic overload." Raya's eyes lit up. "Yes, but we'll need to coordinate perfectly. One mistake could accelerate the process." For the next few minutes, Stephen and Raya worked in perfect synchronization. His understanding of ship systems, honed through years of diplomatic missions, complemented her innate ability to interface with alien technology. As they worked, Stephen couldn't help but marvel at their teamwork. Human intuition and Eliani prowess, combined in a dance of fingers over control panels and streams of data. Finally, with a shuddering groan, the power core stabilized. The warning klaxons fell silent, replaced by the normal hum of a functional starship. Stephen and Raya locked eyes, both breathing heavily from the exertion and tension. In that moment, the chemistry between them was palpable, a force as powerful as the energy they had just contained. "We did it," Raya breathed, a smile breaking across her face. Stephen nodded, allowing himself a moment of relief. But as he looked at the restrained form of Vexlora, he knew their troubles were not nearly finished. "Admiral Blackwood needs to know about this," he said grimly. "The Concordat's reach is greater than we imagined." As they prepared to report their findings, Stephen couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The galaxy stood on the brink of a new era, and he and Raya were at the center of the storm. Storm brewing. The capture of Vexlora had provided valuable intelligence, but it also hinted at a far larger threat than they had initially imagined. As the Zorthak command ship and Admiral Blackwood's battlecruiser approached the Eliani homeworld, the mood aboard both vessels was tense. Stephen found himself working closely with Raya and Admiral Blackwood, coordinating the final details for the upcoming galactic conference. "We need to ensure every security measure is in place," Admiral Blackwood said, her eyes scanning the holographic display of the orbital station where the conference would take place. "The Concordat has already proven they can infiltrate our most secure facilities." Stephen nodded, pointing to several key areas on the map. "We should focus our efforts here, and here. These are the most vulnerable points, based on what we learned from the Zorthak ship." Raya leaned in, her scales shimmering under the low light. "My sisters and I can set up a psionic perimeter. It won't stop a physical attack, but it should alert us to any mental intrusion or attempts at sabotage." As they finalized their plans, the ships entered Eliani orbit. The view from the bridge was breathtaking. The planet's swirling azure oceans and emerald landmasses were surrounded by a glittering array of orbital platforms and sleek Eliani vessels. A transmission crackled through the comms. "Attention incoming fleet. This is Eliani High Command. Welcome to Eleanora Prime. Please proceed to Docking Bay Alpha 7 for the official reception." As they approached the massive orbital station, Stephen's breath caught in his throat. A grand welcoming ceremony was underway, with thousands of Eliani citizens gathered to witness the arrival of the human-Eliani joint fleet. Holographic displays projected images of the captured Zorthak ship, while announcers detailed the heroic actions that had led to this moment. The docking procedure went smoothly, and soon it was time to disembark. Stephen found himself walking alongside Raya, their steps in sync as they made their way down the ramp. He was acutely aware of her presence, the subtle brush of her scales against his arm sending a shiver down his spine. As they emerged onto the station's main concourse, they were met by a sea of faces: Eliani nobles, human diplomats, and representatives from a dozen other species. Stephen noticed the curious glances and whispered conversations their arrival provoked. His unique position as both a human diplomat and the chosen mate of the Eliani princesses had not gone unnoticed. The conference began with a series of high-level security briefings. Stephen took center stage, drawing on his first-hand experience with the Zorthak plot and the discovery of the Concordat. He spoke with conviction, his words carrying the weight of someone who had stared into the face of this new threat. "The Concordat is not just a rogue faction or a disgruntled splinter group," he explained, gesturing to the holographic displays behind him. "They are a highly organized, multi-species organization with reach far beyond what we initially believed. Their goal appears to be nothing less than the destabilization of galactic order as we know it." As he spoke, Stephen could see the impact of his words. Even the most skeptical attendees leaned forward, their expressions a mix of concern and unshakable focus. During a break in the proceedings, Stephen found himself approached by an imposing figure. The alien stood nearly 8 feet tall, its body covered in iridescent scales that seemed to shift color with each movement. "Mr. Richardson," the alien said, its voice a low, melodious rumble. "I am Xanthor of the Andromeda Alliance. Might I have a word?" Stephen nodded, following Xanthor to a quiet corner of the room. The elder statesman's eyes, deep pools of swirling purple, fixed on Stephen with an intensity that made him feel as if his very soul was being examined. "Your warnings about the Concordat are well-founded," Xanthor said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I fear the situation may be even more dire than you realize. We have reason to believe their influence extends beyond the boundaries of the Milky Way." Stephen's mind reeled at the implications. "You're saying the Concordat has a presence in Andromeda as well?" Xanthor nodded solemnly, and potentially beyond. The scale of their operation is unprecedented. As Stephen processed this new information, alarms began to blare throughout the station. Red warning lights flashed, and the sound of running feet echoed through the corridors. "Attention all personnel," a voice boomed over the intercom. "We are experiencing multiple system malfunctions. Please remain calm and follow emergency protocols." Stephen's hand instinctively went to the communicator at his belt. "Raya, what's happening?" Her voice came through, tight with tension. "We're detecting energy signatures consistent with Concordat technology. Stephen, I think they've managed to plant devices throughout the station." Without hesitation, Stephen sprung into action. "I'm on my way. We need to form a team and start searching for these devices immediately." As he raced through the corridors, the gravity of the situation settled over him. The Concordat had struck at the heart of their efforts to unite against them. And now, with representatives from across the galaxy gathered in one place, the stakes couldn't be higher. Stephen knew that the next few hours would be critical. The fate of not just this conference, but potentially multiple galaxies, hung in the balance. As he rounded a corner and saw Raya waiting for him, her expression a mix of drive and concern, he felt a surge of something else as well, a connection that went beyond their shared mission. Together, they would face this threat. And whatever came next, Stephen knew that his bond with Raya would be tested in ways he couldn't yet imagine. As Stephen and Raya rushed through the station's corridors, the gravity of the situation settled over them like a heavy shroud. "We need to find those devices quickly," Stephen said, his voice tight with urgency. "Every second counts." Raya nodded, her scales shimmering with nervous energy. "I can sense them, but the station's layout is making it difficult to pinpoint their exact locations." They moved swiftly through the maze-like structure of the orbital station, their footsteps echoing off the metal walls. Stephen marveled at Raya's ability to interface with the alien technology, her hands gliding over control panels and her eyes glowing with an otherworldly light as she worked. As they disabled each sabotage device, Stephen couldn't help but feel a growing sense of admiration for his Eliani partner. Her quick thinking and unique abilities were proving invaluable in their race against time. After neutralizing several devices, they found themselves in a small maintenance chamber, barely large enough for the two of them. The close quarters heightened Stephen's awareness of Raya's presence, the subtle scent of her scales and the warmth radiating from her body. "This one's more complex," Raya said, her brow furrowed in concentration as she examined the device before them. "I'll need your help to bypass its security measures." Stephen moved closer, his arm brushing against Raya's as he reached for the control panel. The touch sent a jolt of electricity through him, and he saw Raya's scales ripple in response. Working in tandem, they carefully navigated the intricate web of alien circuitry. Stephen's human intuition complemented Raya's technological prowess, and soon they found themselves making progress. As the final security measure fell away, the device powered down with a soft whine. Stephen and Raya locked eyes, a moment of shared triumph passing between them. Without warning, Raya surged forward, pressing her lips against Stephen's. The kiss was passionate and urgent, filled with the pent-up tension of their harrowing mission. Stephen responded instinctively, pulling her closer and losing himself in the moment. As quickly as it began, the kiss ended. They stood there, breathing heavily, their faces mere inches apart. I'm sorry," Raya began, but Stephen shook his head. "Don't be," he said softly, his hand still resting on her waist. Their moment of intimacy was shattered by the urgent beeping of Stephen's communicator. With a reluctant sigh, he activated the device. "Richardson here," he said, his voice slightly breathless. Admiral Blackwood's voice crackled through the speaker, tense and urgent. "Stephen, we have a situation. The Concordat fleet has accelerated its approach, and our long-range scans have picked up something else. Something big. Stephen felt a chill run down his spine. What is it, Admiral? It appears to be some kind of massive space station, unlike anything we've ever seen. Our intelligence is calling it the Nexus. It seems to be the command center for the Concordat's operations. Stephen and Raya exchanged a worried glance. We're almost done here, Admiral. We'll head to the main chamber as soon as we've neutralized the remaining devices. Make it quick, Blackwood replied. We need to brief the delegates on this new development immediately. As they raced to complete their task, Stephen's mind whirled with the implications of this new threat. The Nexus represented a level of technological advancement that could tip the scales of the entire conflict. With the last device disabled, Stephen and Raya sprinted toward the conference's main chamber. They burst through the doors, drawing the attention of the assembled delegates. Forgive the interruption, Stephen said, addressing the room, but we have urgent news. As Stephen and Raya briefed the delegates on the neutralized sabotage attempt and the approaching threat of the Nexus, a palpable tension filled the air. Murmurs of concern rippled through the crowd, and Stephen could see the fear in many eyes. Xanthor, the Andromedan representative, stepped forward. His towering form commanded attention as he spoke. I'm afraid I have further information that may be of grave concern to us all. The room fell silent as Xanthor revealed the true extent of the Concordat's reach, extending even into the Andromeda galaxy. His description of the advanced weaponry and planet-destroying capabilities of structures like the Nexus sent shockwaves through the assembly. As the reality of the situation sank in, Stephen felt a familiar perseverance rising within him. He looked around the room, seeing the diverse array of species represented, each with their own unique strengths and technologies. An idea began to form in his mind. It was risky, unprecedented, but it might be their only chance. Esteemed delegates, Stephen began, his voice carrying across the now silent chamber. I propose we form a multi-species task force to confront this threat. By combining our technologies and tactics, we can create a force that the Concordat won't expect or be prepared for. His words sparked a flurry of discussion. Some delegates voiced skepticism, while others nodded in agreement. As the debate raged, Stephen felt a gentle touch on his arm. He turned to see Raya, her eyes shining with a mixture of pride and concern. It's a bold plan, she said softly, but I think it might be our best hope. As the delegates argued and debated, Stephen's mind raced with the possibilities and challenges ahead. The fate of not just their galaxies, but potentially countless others, hung in the balance. And as he stood there, feeling the weight of Raya's hand on his arm, he knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. Together. As Stephen finished his rousing speech, the delegates' debate reached a fever pitch. Amid the cacophony of alien voices, Admiral Blackwood's voice crackled through Stephen's communicator once more. Richardson, we're out of time. The Concordat fleet is almost upon us, and that massive space station, the Nexus, is moving into position. We need to act now. Stephen exchanged a determined look with Raya. Understood, Admiral. We're on our way. As they rushed out of the conference chamber, Stephen briefed Raya on their next move. We need to assemble an infiltration team. If we can board the Nexus, we might be able to sabotage it from within. Raya nodded, her scales shimmering with anticipation. I'll gather our best operatives. We'll need a mix of skills for this mission. Within minutes, they had assembled a diverse team. Stephen and Raya, of course, along with Zarke, the Zorthak defector whose inside knowledge would be crucial, and a handful of other skilled operatives from various species. They boarded a modified stealth shuttle, its hull gleaming with a combination of human and Eliani technology. As they prepared for launch, Stephen took the pilot seat, with Raya as his co-pilot. The shuttle slipped out of the station's docking bay, its advanced cloaking systems rendering it nearly invisible against the backdrop of space. As they approached the Nexus, Stephen's hands moved deftly over the controls, guiding them through the maze of Concordat ships. Suddenly, a massive vessel materialized between them and their target. Its hull was a patchwork of alien metals, overflowing with weapons that seemed to defy the laws of physics. "Evasive maneuvers," Stephen called out, his voice tight with concentration. He banked the shuttle hard, narrowly avoiding a stray energy beam from the behemoth. Raya's fingers flew across her console, adjusting their cloak to match the changing conditions. "That's the Concordat flagship," she said, her voice filled with awe and fear. "The Harbinger." Stephen gritted his teeth, pulling the shuttle into a tight spiral to avoid detection. The Harbinger sensors swept the area, searching for any sign of intruders. For a heart-stopping moment, it seemed certain they would be discovered. But Stephen's piloting skills, honed through years of training in combat, combined perfectly with Raya's mastery of Eliani cloaking technology. They slipped past the flagship's defenses, its crew none the wiser. As they approached the Nexus, Zarke spoke up from behind them. "There," he said, pointing to a seemingly blank section of the station's hull. "A hidden docking port. It's used for covert operations." Stephen nodded, adjusting their course. "Good eye, Zarke. Raya, can you interface with their systems? We'll need to bypass their security protocols." Raya closed her eyes, extending her consciousness into the Nexus's computer network. Her scales rippled with energy as she worked, her mind navigating the alien architecture of the station systems. "I'm in," she said after a tense moment. "Docking protocols bypassed. We're clear to land." Stephen guided the shuttle into the concealed port with practiced ease. As the airlock sealed behind them, he turned to address the team. "We'll split into 2 groups," he said, his voice low and intense. "I'll lead one team to the central power core. Marcus, you take the second team to the command center. Gather intel. Sabotage their communications if you can." The teams divided quickly, each member checking their gear one last time before disembarking. As Stephen's group moved into the station's corridors, they were immediately struck by the diversity of the Concordat's workforce. Aliens of all shapes and sizes moved about, some with forms that defied human comprehension. Raya used her Eliani abilities to create localized disruptions in the station's internal sensors, allowing them to move undetected. They made their way deeper into the Nexus, the gravity of their mission weighing heavily on each of them. As they approached a heavily guarded section leading to the power core, Stephen held up a hand, signaling the team to stop. He peered around a corner, assessing the situation. "Heavy security," he whispered. "We'll have to fight our way through." Raya nodded, her hands already glowing with pent-up energy. Zarke readied his alien weapon, its design unlike anything in the human arsenal. Stephen took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. "On my mark," he said, his voice barely audible. 3, 2, 1. Now! They burst from cover, a whirlwind of human dedication, Eliani energy, and Zorthak firepower. The guards, caught off guard by the sudden assault, fell quickly before their combined might. As the last guard fell, alarms began to blare throughout the station. Stephen made a split-second decision. "Zarke," he called out, "create a diversion. Sabotage that auxiliary system over there. Raya and I will make a dash for the power core." Zarke nodded, moving quickly to comply. Stephen grabbed Raya's hand, and together they sprinted down the corridor towards their ultimate goal. They burst into the massive chamber housing the Nexus's power core, and for a moment, both were struck speechless by the sight before them. A colossal energy matrix pulsed with otherworldly power, its heart a swirling mass of the rare element they had come to disrupt. As they approached the core, Stephen and Raya realized the true scale of the challenge before them. The core's defenses were far more formidable than they had anticipated, a complex web of energy fields and alien technology. Raya stepped forward, her hands outstretched as she attempted to interface directly with the core systems. But the alien technology resisted her efforts, pushing back against her probes with increasing force. Stephen watched her struggle, his mind racing. Suddenly, an idea struck him. "Raya," he said, moving closer to her, "let's try something new. What if we combine our abilities? My human intuition with your energy manipulation?" Raya's eyes widened at the suggestion, but she nodded. "It's worth a try." Stephen stepped up behind her, placing his hands on her shoulders. As Raya reached out to the core once more, Stephen closed his eyes, focusing all of his problem-solving skills and intuition on the task at hand. To their amazement, it worked. The unique combination of human and Eliani abilities began to bypass the core's defenses, layer by layer. As they worked, Stephen became acutely aware of Raya's presence, the warmth of her body, the subtle scent of her scales, the synchronicity of their movements. In the intensity of the moment, Stephen found himself turning Raya to face him. Their eyes met, and without a word, they came together in a passionate kiss. For a brief, electric moment, the universe seemed to fall away, leaving only the two of them in the swirling energies of the alien power core. Their intimate moment was shattered by a sudden surge in the core's energy output. Alarms blared as they realized their tampering had triggered an automatic defense mechanism. The core was beginning to overload, threatening to destroy not just the Nexus, but potentially the nearby Eliani system as well. As they scrambled to contain the impending disaster, Stephen's communicator crackled to life. Marcus's voice came through, tight with urgency. "Stephen, we've got a problem. The intelligence we've gathered, it's worse than we thought. The Nexus is preparing to unleash a weapon capable of collapsing entire star systems. We need to stop it, now." Stephen and Raya exchanged a look of unyielding commitment. The stakes had just become impossibly higher. With time running out and the fate of multiple galaxies hanging in the balance, they turned back to the pulsating core, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The urgency of their situation intensified as they turned back to the pulsating core, determined to complete their mission. Suddenly, a hissing sound filled the air. Stephen's eyes widened as he recognized the telltale signs of a defense mechanism activating. "Gas!" he shouted, pulling Raya close. "Hold your breath." A thick, greenish mist began to seep into the chamber from hidden vents. Stephen's mind raced, recalling his training on alien chemical agents. He quickly reached for his gear, fumbling with the straps of his pack as the paralytic gas swirled around them. Raya's movements began to slow, her scales dulling as the gas took effect. Stephen, surprisingly more resistant due to his human physiology, managed to retrieve 2 emergency breathing apparatus from his pack. With practiced efficiency, he secured one over Raya's face, then his own. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice muffled through the mask. Raya nodded weakly, her eyes showing gratitude and purpose. They turned back to the core, but the gas had already begun to affect their motor skills. Stephen's fingers felt thick and unresponsive as he tried to manipulate the alien controls. Raya stumbled, nearly falling before Stephen caught her. "We need to support each other," Stephen said, wrapping an arm around Raya's waist. She leaned into him, and together they faced the daunting task before them. As they struggled against the effects of the gas, a soft glow caught Stephen's eye. Raya's crystal necklace, a gift from her sisters, was pulsing with an intense light. The alien technology of the core seemed to resonate with the crystal, causing it to shine brighter with each passing moment. "Raya," Stephen said, an idea forming in his mind. "Your necklace, I think it's reacting to the core. Can you use it to amplify your abilities?" Raya's eyes widened with understanding. She grasped the crystal, feeling its warmth against her palm. As she focused her energy through the gem, her connection to the core system strengthened exponentially. "It's working," she gasped, her voice filled with awe. "I can see deeper into the core's architecture now." Stephen positioned himself behind Raya, supporting her as she worked. "Let's use the crystal as a focal point," he suggested. "I'll guide your movements while you navigate the systems." Together, they began to create a complex feedback loop within the power core. Stephen's intuition and problem-solving skills complemented Raya's enhanced abilities perfectly. Slowly but surely, the rare element powering the Nexus began to destabilize. Alarms blared throughout the station as the sabotage took effect. The weapon system started to falter, and the station's shields flickered ominously. However, the process was taking longer than they had anticipated. Stephen's communicator crackled to life. Marcus Henry's voice came through, tense and urgent. "Stephen, we've accessed critical intel, but we're trapped in the command center. Concordat forces are closing in. We're transmitting the data to Admiral Blackwood now." Before Stephen could respond, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed from the corridor outside. Concordat security forces were converging on their location. "We need more time," Raya said, her hand still working furiously at the core's controls. Stephen's mind raced, considering their options. "I have an idea," he said, his voice tight with drive. "I'll use the station's internal transport system to lead them on a chase. It'll buy you time to finish here." Raya turned to face him, her eyes wide with concern. "That's too dangerous. You'll be alone out there." Stephen cupped her face gently, mindful of their breathing masks. "It's our best chance. I trust you to finish this." Their eyes locked, conveying a depth of emotion that words couldn't express. Despite the awkwardness of their breathing apparatus, they managed a quick, passionate kiss. As they separated, Raya's crystal pulsed even brighter, as if energized by their connection. "Be careful," Raya whispered as Stephen moved towards the exit. He paused at the doorway, looking back at her one last time. "You too. I'll see you at the shuttle." With that, Stephen disappeared into the corridor, ready to lead the Concordat forces on a wild chase through the labyrinthine station. Raya turned back to the core, her crystal glowing brilliantly, determined to complete their mission and save countless lives across the galaxies. As Stephen sprinted through the Nexus's winding passageways, he could hear the thunderous footsteps of the Concordat security forces behind him. His breaths came in ragged gasps, the paralytic gas still affecting his system despite the breathing apparatus. He rounded a corner, nearly losing his footing as the artificial gravity fluctuated wildly. Back at the power core, Raya's battle had taken an unexpected turn. The Nexus's central AI, alerted to her tampering, began actively counteracting her efforts. It was a silent, invisible struggle. Eliani willpower versus artificial intelligence. Raya gritted her teeth, channeling every ounce of her strength through the glowing crystal. Stephen found himself in an unfamiliar section of the station, his vision blurring as the gas's effects intensified. The sound of approaching enemies echoed from multiple directions. He was cornered, his options rapidly dwindling. Just as despair began to set in, a familiar voice called out, "Stephen, this way." Zarkay appeared from a hidden alcove, gesturing urgently. Stephen stumbled towards her, grateful for the unexpected ally. Together, they ducked into a maintenance shaft, narrowly evading their pursuers. "How did you find me?" Stephen gasped as they crawled through the cramped space. Zarkay's mandibles clicked in what Stephen had come to recognize as a smile. "I know the station's layout better than they do. Come on, we need to keep moving." As they continued their evasion, Raya made a breakthrough at the power core. By manipulating her crystal's energy in a specific pattern, she created a localized electromagnetic pulse. The AI's influence faltered, giving her the opening she needed. With a final surge of effort, Raya completed the sabotage sequence. The core's energy output became erratic, and systems throughout the Nexus began to fail. She allowed herself a moment of triumph before the reality of their situation set in. They needed to escape, and quickly. Stephen and Zarke fought their way back through the chaos of the disintegrating station. They arrived at the power core chamber to find Raya slumped against a console, exhausted but victorious. "We did it," she said weakly as Stephen helped her to her feet. "We're not done yet," Stephen replied, supporting her weight. "We need to get to the shuttle." The trio began their desperate race through the failing station. Gravity shifted unpredictably, sending them floating one moment and crashing to the floor the next. Energy discharges from overloading systems scorched the air around them. They reached the docking bay, only to find it in chaos. Concordat personnel scrambled to evacuate, pushing and shoving in their panic. Their stealth shuttle sat tantalizingly close, but reaching it undetected seemed impossible. Stephen surveyed the scene, his mind racing. "We need a distraction," he muttered. Zarke nodded, her alien features set with grit. "I have an idea. Be ready to move." Before Stephen or Raya could protest, Zarke slipped into the crowd. Moments later, alarms blared from the far side of the docking bay. As the panicked Concordat forces rushed to investigate, Stephen saw their chance. "Now!" he hissed, half carrying Raya as they sprinted for the shuttle. They reached the vessel just as a violent tremor shook the station. The docking clamps released automatically, and Stephen threw himself into the pilot's seat. His fingers flew over the controls, muscle memory taking over despite his impaired state. The shuttle's engines roared to life as another explosion rocked the Nexus. Through the view screen, Stephen saw the massive station beginning to break apart. Concordat ships scattered in all directions, their formation in disarray. "Where's Zarke?" Raya asked, her voice tight with concern. As if in answer, the shuttle's airlock hissed open. Zarke tumbled in, singed and battered but alive. "Go!" she shouted. "Get us out of here." Stephen needed no further encouragement. He gunned the engines, piloting the shuttle out of the disintegrating docking bay and into the chaos of the space battle beyond. As they cleared the Nexus, the full scale of the conflict became apparent. Admiral Blackwood's forces pressed their advantage against the suddenly vulnerable Concordat fleet. Explosions bloomed silently in the void of space as ships on both sides were hit. The Nexus, once an impregnable fortress, now drifted in pieces, its fearsome weapon rendered useless. Stephen weaved through the battlefield, acutely aware of the precious cargo his shuttle carried, not just his companions, but the hope for multiple galaxies. As they flew towards the relative safety of the Allied lines, Stephen allowed himself a moment of cautious optimism. They had succeeded in their mission against incredible odds. But as the Nexus's debris field receded behind them and new challenges loomed ahead, he knew their journey was not nearly finished. The shuttle sped on, carrying its battered but unbroken crew towards an uncertain future. The battle for the fate of galaxies raged on around them, a stark reminder of the monumental task that still lay ahead. The shuttle sped on, carrying its battered but unbroken crew towards an uncertain future. The battle for the fate of galaxies raged on around them, a stark reminder of the monumental task that still lay ahead. As they approached the docking bay of the Nexus, Stephen's eyes narrowed, spotting an unexpected development amidst the chaos. A group of high-ranking Concordat officials huddled near a heavily armed shuttle, their distinctive uniforms setting them apart from the panicked masses. At their center stood a tall, imposing figure with piercing eyes and an air of authority that commanded attention even in the midst of the evacuation. Stephen recognized him instantly from intelligence briefings. Grand Architect Zelvax, one of the Concordat's most influential leaders. "Change of plans," Stephen said, his voice tight with urgency. He gestured towards the Concordat shuttle. "We're going after them." Raya and Zarke exchanged quick glances, then nodded in agreement. They understood the potential value of capturing such a high-ranking official. As alarms blared and evacuees scrambled for escape pods, Steven used hand signals to communicate their new strategy. Raya moved towards a nearby control panel, her fingers dancing over the alien interface. Suddenly, escape pods across the bay began to malfunction, their hatches opening and closing at random intervals. The resulting confusion provided the cover they needed. Zarke slipped away, her live form blending into the shadows as she made her way towards the Concordat shuttle. Steven watched as she reached the vessel, her knowledge of Zorthak technology allowing her to quickly access a maintenance panel. Within moments, the shuttle's weapon systems powered down, leaving it vulnerable. Steven took a deep breath, fighting against the lingering effects of the paralytic gas. His muscles ached, but commitment pushed him forward. He began to weave through the crowd, his eyes locked on Grand Architect Zelvax. Just as Steven neared his target, a violent tremor shook the station. The artificial gravity fluctuated wildly, sending bodies flying in all directions. Steven used the moment of chaos to his advantage. He launched himself at Zelvax, tackling the Concordat leader to the ground. The two men grappled fiercely, rolling across the docking bay floor as the gravity shifted around them. Zelvax was strong, his alien physiology granting him a natural advantage. But Steven's human adaptability allowed him to adjust more quickly to the changing conditions. As they fought, Steven felt the station shudder beneath them. The Nexus was falling apart, their time running out. With a surge of adrenaline, he managed to pin Zelvax's arms behind his back. Reaching for his tactical gear, Steven pulled out a set of restraints and secured the Concordat leader's wrists. "Raya, Zarke," Steven called out, his voice barely audible over the din of the evacuation. He saw them emerge from the crowd, their eyes widening at the sight of the captured Grand Architect. Together, they fought their way to the Concordat shuttle. Zarke's Sabotage had left it defenseless, its weapon systems dark and unresponsive. They boarded quickly, Steven dragging the restrained Zelvax with them. Raya immediately moved to the shuttle's controls. Her hands flew over the alien interface, her Eliani abilities allowing her to quickly override the systems. The engines hummed to life as she initiated the launch sequence. The shuttle blasted out of the disintegrating Nexus, emerging into a sea of chaos. The space around them was filled with debris and weapons fire as Admiral Blackwood's allied fleet pressed their advantage against the faltering Concordat forces. Steven activated the shuttle's communication system. "Admiral Blackwood, this is Steven. We've escaped the Nexus and have captured Grand Architect Zelvax. Requesting rendezvous coordinates." The Admiral's voice crackled through the speakers, tight with surprise and urgency. "Understood, Steven. Transmitting coordinates now." "Well done." As Raya piloted the shuttle towards a rendezvous point, she cast a concerned glance at Steven. "You're injured," she said, noticing the bruises forming on his face and arms from his struggle with Zelvax. Steven grimaced. "It's nothing serious." But he didn't resist as Raya retrieved a medical kit and began tending to his wounds. Her touch was gentle, and despite the chaos surrounding them, Steven found himself acutely aware of her closeness. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the battle outside seemed to fade away. Raya's hand lingered on Steven's arm, the gesture speaking volumes in the confined space of the shuttle. The moment was broken by Zarke's excited chittering. "Look at this," she said, holding up a small crystal she had discovered on Zelvax's person. "It's a data storage device. From its encryption, I'd say it contains highly sensitive information." Steven's eyes widened. "That could be invaluable." "Good work, Zarke." Their celebration was cut short as the shuttle sensors blared a warning. A squadron of Concordat fighters, unaware of the shuttle's new occupants, moved to intercept them. "Evasive maneuvers," Stephen called out, taking the helm from Raya. His hands flew over the controls as he pushed the shuttle to its limits, dodging energy blasts and debris. Raya worked furiously to reroute power to the engines and shields, while Zarke managed to partially reactivate the weapon systems. Their teamwork allowed them to fight through the Concordat squadron, but not without taking damage. As they approached Admiral Blackwood's flagship, alarms began to sound throughout the shuttle. "We're losing engine power," Raya reported, her voice tense. Stephen gritted his teeth, pushing the failing craft forward. The flagship's hangar bay loomed ahead, their only chance for safety. With a final burst of speed, they crossed the energy barrier into the hangar. The shuttle skidded across the deck, sparks flying as metal scraped against metal. It came to a screeching halt mere meters from the far wall, smoke billowing from its engines. Stephen, Raya, and Zarke quickly evacuated the shuttle, dragging the restrained Zelvax with them. A team of human and alien medics rushed forward, providing immediate aid. Admiral Blackwood strode into the hangar, her face a mix of relief and urgency as she approached the group. Stephen handed her the data crystal they had recovered from Zelvax. "This could change everything," Blackwood said, her eyes gleaming as she examined the crystal. "You've done more than just win a battle today. You may have given us the key to ending this war." As the adrenaline of their escape began to fade, Stephen and Raya found themselves standing close, their shoulders touching. They exchanged a look of shared accomplishment and deepening connection, both aware that their bond had been forged stronger in the crucible of their mission. Yet, as they watched Admiral Blackwood lead the captured Zelvax away for interrogation, they knew that their work was a long way to go. The battle for the Nexus might be won, but the war against the Concordat was entering a new phase, one that would span multiple galaxies and challenge them in ways they had yet to imagine. Imagine. The captured Grand Architect Zelvax sat motionless in the corner of the hangar, his piercing eyes scanning the chaos around him. Stephen couldn't shake the feeling that even in defeat, the Concordat leader exuded an air of dangerous confidence. Admiral Blackwood's voice cut through Stephen's thoughts. "We need to move quickly. The information on this crystal could be the key to dismantling the Concordat's entire operation. I want all of you in the command center for an immediate debriefing." As they made their way through the flagship's corridors, Stephen felt the weight of exhaustion settling into his bones. The adrenaline that had carried him through their harrowing escape was fading, replaced by a dull ache that permeated his entire body. The command center bustled with activity as they entered. Holographic displays flickered to life, projecting real-time battle data and damage reports. Admiral Blackwood wasted no time, inserting the data crystal into a central console. "Before we begin," she said, turning to face the group, "I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Elias Thorne, our chief xenobiologist." A man in his late 50s stepped forward, his wild gray hair and intense blue eyes giving him the look of a mad scientist. "Fascinating," he muttered, eyes fixed on the alien data streaming across the screens. "Simply fascinating." As Dr. Thorne began decoding the crystal's contents, Stephen found himself drawn to a particular holographic display. It showed a network of interconnected points spread across multiple galaxies. "What are we looking at?" he asked, his voice hoarse from the smoke and stress of their recent ordeal. Admiral Blackwood's expression darkened. "Concordat bazas. Dozens of them, spread farther than we ever imagined. Weapon development facilities, political manipulation centers, resource extraction operations. This isn't just an organization. It's an empire." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Their victory at the Nexus, while significant, now seemed like a mere skirmish in a much larger war. Suddenly, an urgent transmission cut through the tense atmosphere. A holographic image of an Eliani council member materialized in the center of the room. "Greetings, allies," the Eliani said, her voice tinged with awe-inspiring panic. The exposure of High Minister Zalthor's betrayal has thrown our government into chaos. Factions are forming, and we fear civil war may be imminent. We request the immediate return of Stephen Richardson to participate in a stabilization ceremony. His unique position as both a human hero and an honorary Eliani citizen makes him crucial to restoring order. Stephen felt all eyes in the room turn to him. He glanced at Raya, seeing the conflict in her eyes that mirrored his own inner turmoil. Admiral Blackwood stepped forward. "We need you here, Stephen. The information we're uncovering is critical to our efforts against the Concordat." "With all due respect, Admiral," Raya interjected, "if the Eliani government collapses, we lose a vital ally in this fight. We can't afford that." The room erupted into heated discussion. Stephen closed his eyes, trying to quiet the competing voices in his head. When he opened them, he met Admiral Blackwood's gaze with renewed dedication. "I have to go," he said firmly. "The alliance we've forged is too important to risk. I'll take a small team, stabilize the situation, and return as quickly as possible." Admiral Blackwood nodded reluctantly. "Very well, but I want you back here the moment the situation is under control. We can't afford to lose momentum." As preparations for their departure began, Dr. Thorne approached Stephen, his eyes wide with a mix of excitement and concern. "Mr. Richardson, I've made a rather disturbing discovery," he said, lowering his voice. "The Concordat data contains information on extensive genetic experiments. They've been manipulating the DNA of various species, including humans and Eliani. It appears they're trying to create some sort of hybrid beings with enhanced abilities." Stephen felt a chill run down his spine. "What kind of abilities?" "It's unclear," Dr. Thorne replied, shaking his head. "But the potential implications are staggering. These hybrids could be anything from advanced operatives to super soldiers." The revelation added a new layer of urgency to their mission. As Stephen and Raya prepared to board the diplomatic shuttle, they shared a look of unshakable focus. "We need to be prepared for anything," Stephen said quietly. "If the Concordat has been experimenting on Eliani." Raya nodded, her hand unconsciously moving to the hilt of her energy blade. "We'll need to investigate discreetly. Any Concordat agents on my homeworld could jeopardize everything we've fought for." Before they could board the shuttle, Dr. Thorne insisted on performing a thorough medical examination on Stephen. As the doctor ran his scanners over Stephen's body, his brow furrowed with concern. "Interesting," he murmured. "There are some anomalies in your genetic structure, Mr. Richardson. Nothing immediately harmful, but unusual. It appears to be a result of your prolonged exposure to Eliani technology and your interactions with Princess Raya." Stephen exchanged a worried glance with Raya. "What does that mean exactly?" Dr. Thorne shook his head. "I'm not entirely sure. We'll need to monitor these changes closely. For now, they don't seem to be causing any adverse effects." As they boarded the diplomatic shuttle, Stephen couldn't shake the feeling that he was heading into a situation far more complex than he had initially realized. The political powder keg of the Eliani homeworld, the potential presence of genetically modified Concordat agents, and the mysterious changes in his own body all swirled in his mind. The shuttle's engines hummed to life, and Stephen felt Raya's hand slip into his own. As they lifted off from the flagship's hangar, leaving behind the debris field of the Nexus and the ongoing efforts of Admiral Blackwood's fleet, Stephen knew that the challenges ahead would test them in ways they couldn't yet imagine. The stars streaked past the shuttle's viewports as they entered hyperspace, hurtling towards an uncertain future on the Eliani homeworld. Stephen tightened his grip on Raya's hand, drawing strength from their connection as they prepared to face whatever awaited them in the heart of her people's civilization. The diplomatic shuttle emerged from hyperspace, the Eliani homeworld looming large in the view screen. Stephen and Raya exchanged a nervous glance as they prepared for their descent. Entering Eliani airspace now, the pilot announced, his voice tight with concentration. Suddenly, the shuttle lurched violently, throwing Stephen and Raya against their restraints. Alarms blared as the craft shuddered and bucked. "What's happening?" Stephen called out, fighting to keep his balance. The pilot's fingers flew across the controls. "Encountering severe turbulence. It's not natural. Some kind of energy disruption field." Through the view screen, Stephen could see the spaceport below. A sea of bodies swarmed around it, their forms tiny but numerous. Flashes of light erupted from the crowd, each pulse sending a fresh wave of turbulence through the shuttle. "Protesters," Raya said, her eyes narrowing. "They're using makeshift energy disruptors." The pilot managed to guide them through the worst of the interference, bringing the shuttle down for a rough but safe landing. As the engines powered down, Stephen could hear the muffled roar of the crowd outside. The shuttle's hatch hissed open, revealing a tall, imposing Eliani male in military dress. His crest was a deep blue, marked with the insignia of high rank. "Mr. Richardson, Princess Raya," he said, bowing slightly. "I am General Kelvoran. I've been tasked with ensuring your safety during your stay." As they stepped onto the landing pad, the full force of the crowd's energy hit them. Chants and shouts filled the air, competing with the whine of energy disruptors and the crackle of force fields. "The situation has deteriorated rapidly since High Minister Zalthor's betrayal," Kelvoran explained as he led them towards an armored transport. "3 major factions have emerged, each vying for control." Inside the transport, Kelvoran brought up a holographic display. The traditionalists, led by Elder Council Nexus, want to return to our isolationist ways. The progressives, under Senator Zoreth, push for greater galactic integration. And the neutralists, headed by Matriarch Eliazon, seek a middle ground. As the transport wound its way through the capital's streets, Stephen and Raya witnessed firsthand the unrest gripping the planet. Crowds lined the thoroughfares, their competing chants creating a cacophony of political discord. Energy banners flickered overhead, each proclaiming allegiance to one faction or another. Stephen's attention was drawn to the faces in the crowd. Something about them seemed off, different from the Eliani he remembered. Subtle variations in crest patterns, slight alterations in facial structure. It was as if someone had taken the Eliani template and tweaked it ever so slightly. Dr. Thorne's warnings about genetic experimentation echoed in Stephen's mind. He leaned close to Raya, keeping his voice low. "Are you seeing what I'm seeing? The protesters, they look different." Raya nodded, her expression grim. "I noticed it too. We'll need to investigate this carefully." The transport came to a stop outside the Grand Assembly Hall, a towering structure of crystalline spires and bioluminescent arches. General Kelvoran ushered them inside, past layers of security, and into the heart of Eliani political power. The council chamber was a maelstrom of raised voices and flaring tempers. Representatives from each faction sat in tiered seating, eyeing each other with barely concealed hostility. At the center of it all stood a raised platform, currently occupied by a stern-looking Eliani female. "Elder Counselor Nexus," Kelvoran whispered, nodding towards the speaker. "She's about to call the emergency session to order." Nexus's voice cut through the din like a laser. "Silence. We will have order in this chamber." As the noise died down, she continued, "We have with us today Stephen Richardson, chosen mate of our princesses and hero of the recent conflict. Mr. Richardson, will you address the council?" Stephen took a deep breath and stepped forward. The weight of every eye in the chamber pressed down on him as he began to speak. "Esteemed members of the council, citizens of the Eliani homeworld, I come before you today not as an outsider, but as someone who has fought alongside your people, who has come to love your world as his own. The threat we face, the Concordat, is greater than any one faction or ideology. It is only through unity that we can hope to dash A commotion from the public gallery cut Stephen off mid-sentence. A group of individuals, their features subtly altered in a way that sent a chill down Stephen's spine, surged forward. They moved with unnatural speed and coordination, overwhelming the security personnel. One of the intruders raised a device, thumb hovering over a button. Time seemed to slow as Stephen's combat instincts kicked in. He lunged forward, shouting a warning, but he was too late. The device activated with a soft click, releasing a shimmering gas into the chamber. Chaos erupted as council members and attendees began to stumble, their movements uncoordinated, their eyes wide with confusion and fear. Stephen felt the effects of the gas tugging at the edges of his consciousness, but it wasn't as strong as he expected. He glanced at Raya and saw the same realization in her eyes. They were affected, but not as severely as the native Eliani. The ventilation system, Raya shouted over the growing pandemonium. We need to activate it. Together, they fought their way through the disoriented crowd towards the environmental controls. As Stephen's fingers flew over the unfamiliar interface, he could hear Ray's voices behind him. This is an outrage. That was Elder Council Nexera, her voice shrill with anger and fear. Zoreth, you Concordat puppet, you planned this attack. How dare you? Senator Zoreth's response was equally heated. If anyone here is in league with the Concordat, it's you and your isolationist lackeys. Matriarch Eliazon's normally calming tones were strained as she tried to mediate. Please, we must remain calm and united in the face of this crisis. With a final command, Stephen activated the emergency ventilation. The shimmering gas began to dissipate, drawn away by powerful air currents. As the chamber cleared, the full extent of the chaos became apparent. General Kelvorn approached, his uniform disheveled but his bearing still proud. The intruders have been captured, he reported. We're beginning interrogations now, but early indications suggest they're part of a splinter group with ties to both the Concordat and extremist elements within our society. The news sent fresh waves of shock and anger through the assembled council members. Stephen knew he had to act fast to prevent the situation from spiraling further out of control. Members of the council, he said, his voice carrying across the chamber. What we've witnessed today is a clear attempt to destabilize your government. But it's also shown us something crucial, the extent of the Concordat's infiltration. We can't afford to be divided any longer. Stephen paused, his mind racing as he formulated a plan. I propose the formation of a temporary coalition government with representatives from all three major factions. This coalition should have two primary objectives: rooting out Concordat influence within Eliani society and preparing defenses against future attacks. The chamber erupted into a fresh round of debate, but Stephen could see that his words had struck a chord. As discussions about the coalition began in earnest, Raya pulled him aside. Stephen, she said, her voice low and urgent. There's something else we need to talk about. I've been noticing changes in myself since the Nexus. Changes similar to what Dr. Thorne found in you. Stephen felt a mix of concern and curiosity wash over him. What kind of changes? Before Raya could answer, a commotion near the entrance caught their attention. Dr. Thorne himself had arrived, accompanied by a team of human and alien scientists. As night fell on the capital city, the Eliani High Council continued its heated debates. Stephen and Raya found a moment of respite on a balcony overlooking the bioluminescent gardens of the Grand Assembly Hall. The soft glow of the plants below contrasted sharply with the tension that still hung in the air. Stephen wrapped an arm around Raya's waist, drawing her close. Whatever's happening to us, he said softly, whatever challenges we face, we'll face them together. Raya leaned into his embrace, her crest flickering with a mix of emotions. As they stood there, looking out over the troubled city, both knew that their journey was far from finished. The coalition government was just the beginning, uncovering the full extent of the Concordat's plans. dealing with the genetic changes in themselves and others, and navigating the complex political landscape of the Eliani homeworld. All of these challenges lay ahead. But for now, in this quiet moment, they drew strength from each other's presence. The physical closeness they shared stood in stark contrast to the political turmoil surrounding them, a reminder of what they were fighting for. 4. The stars above twinkled, a stark reminder of the vastness of the challenges that lay ahead. As the first light of dawn broke over the Eliani capital, Stephen's communicator chirped urgently. A message from General Kelvorn appeared on the screen. Emergency meeting. Medical facility. Now. Stephen and Raya exchanged a look of concern before hurrying through the winding corridors of the Grand Assembly Complex. They arrived at a secure medical wing, where they found Dr. Elias Thorne waiting for them, surrounded by a team of human and alien scientists. Mr. Richardson, Princess Raya. Dr. Thorne greeted them, his face etched with a mix of excitement and apprehension. We've made some significant discoveries regarding your genetic modifications. As they gathered around a holographic display, Dr. Thorne began his explanation. Our preliminary analysis shows that the changes in both of you are a result of prolonged exposure to Eliani technology, particularly the energy fields generated by the princess's abilities. The hologram shifted, displaying a complex network of neural pathways. Stephen, in your case, the modifications have enhanced your neuroplasticity. This allows you to adapt more quickly to alien environments and technologies. Stephen flexed his fingers, recalling how easily he had interfaced with Eliani systems during the recent crisis. That explains a lot, he murmured. Dr. Thorne turned to Raya. Princess, your modifications have strengthened your energy manipulation abilities and improved your resistance to human-made technologies. Raya's crest flickered with interest. I had noticed an increase in my power output, but I didn't realize the extent of the changes. Before they could delve deeper into the implications of these findings, an ear-piercing alarm blared throughout the facility. General Kelvorn burst into the room, his usually composed demeanor shattered by urgency. We're under attack, he announced, his voice tight. A Concordat strike team has breached the capital's defensive perimeter. They're using advanced cloaking technology, and our sensors can't detect them. We believe their target is the Grand Assembly Complex. Stephen's mind raced, processing the new information and formulating a plan. Doctor, he said, turning to Thorne, you said my neuroplasticity has been enhanced. Could I interface directly with the Eliani defense systems? Dr. Thorne nodded cautiously. In theory, yes, but it's never been attempted before. We don't have time for caution, Stephen replied. He turned to Raya. Can you create a wide-range disruption field? It might interfere with their cloaking devices. Raya's eyes lit up with understanding. Yes, I think I can manage that. General Kelvorn led them to the complex's central security hub. Stephen placed his hands on the smooth, organic surface of the main control panel. He closed his eyes, focusing his thoughts. At first, there was nothing but a jumble of alien data streams. Then, slowly, the information began to coalesce into recognizable patterns. I can see them, Stephen said, his voice distant. Faint outlines. Moving through the eastern corridor. Raya stood in the center of the room, her hands outstretched. The air around her began to shimmer with barely visible waves of energy. Disruption field active, she announced. On the security feeds, ghostly figures suddenly flickered into view. Eliani security forces, guided by Stephen's enhanced perception, moved to intercept the intruders. As the battle unfolded, Stephen noticed something unsettling about the Concordat operatives. Some of them. They looked like the modified protesters from yesterday, he said, his brow furrowed in concentration. Dr. Thorne, who had followed them to the security hub, leaned in to examine the footage. This confirms our theories about Concordat hybridization experiments, he said grimly. The sound of energy weapons and shouts echoed through the complex as the Eliani security forces engaged the Concordat strike team. Stephen and Raya coordinated their efforts, with Stephen guiding the defenders and Raya maintaining the disruption field that kept the intruders visible. Suddenly, a group of Concordat agents broke through the defenses, heading straight for the Grand Assembly chamber. Stephen and Raya exchanged a quick glance before sprinting towards the political heart of the complex. They arrived to find chaos. Council members scattered, seeking cover as energy blasts scorched the ornate walls. In the midst of the mayhem, Stephen saw Senator Zoreth push Elder Councilor Nexus out of the path of an energy blast, taking the hit himself. The act of selflessness seemed to shock the room into silence. For a moment, the political divisions that had defined the council melted away in the face of a common threat. Stephen and Raya moved as one, their enhanced abilities complementing each other perfectly. Stephen's heightened perception allowed him to anticipate the Concordat agents' movements, while Raya's energy manipulation provided both offense and defense. As they fought, Stephen called out to the council members, "This is what we face. The Concordat doesn't care about your political divisions. We must stand united." Their synchronized combat style turned the tide of the battle. Eliani security forces, inspired by the couple's effectiveness, rallied to drive the remaining Concordat operatives from the complex. In the aftermath, as the injured were tended to and the damage assessed, the three political factions gathered in the center of the chamber. Elder Councilor Nexus, her usual stern expression softened by recent events, was the first to speak. "Perhaps," she said, looking at Senator Zoreth, who was being treated for his injuries, "we have allowed our differences to blind us to the greater threat we all face." Matriarch Eleazon nodded in agreement. "The time for division is past. We must form the coalition government and focus on the real enemy." As the political leaders began to hash out the details of their new alliance, Dr. Thorne approached Stephen and Raya. "Your performance today was remarkable," he said, his eyes gleaming with scientific curiosity. "I have a theory that your unique genetic modifications might be the key to developing a method for detecting Concordat hybrid agents." Stephen raised an eyebrow. "What did you have in mind, Doctor?" "A series of experiments," Thorne replied. "If successful, it could lead to a breakthrough in identifying and countering Concordat infiltration attempts across multiple species." Before Stephen or Raya could respond, General Kelvorn interrupted with a grave expression. "We're receiving reports from Admiral Blackwood's fleet," he said. "Concordat activity is increasing in neighboring star systems." The newly formed coalition turned to face this latest development, the weight of their responsibility settling heavily upon them. As discussions began on how to respond to this growing threat, Stephen and Raya found themselves at the center of not just a political transformation, but potentially a turning point in the larger galactic conflict. The couple shared a look of grit. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, their bond strengthened by the shared experience of their genetic modifications and the battles they had fought side by side. Side by side, their genetic modifications intertwining their destinies in ways they were only beginning to understand. The urgent chirp of Stephen's communicator broke the moment. Admiral Blackwood's holographic image materialized before them, his face etched with concern. "Richardson, we've got a situation," Blackwood said, his voice tense. "The Concordat has launched a major offensive against several key allied worlds, including Earth. We need immediate assistance from the Eliani. Their energy manipulation technology might be our only hope to counter these attacks." Stephen's face hardened as he processed the information. "Understood, Admiral. We'll present this to the coalition government immediately." As they hurried back to the Grand Assembly chamber, Stephen and Raya found the newly formed coalition already embroiled in heated debate. Elder Councilor Nexus's voice rose above the din, advocating for limited involvement to protect Eliani interests. Senator Zoreth, still bandaged from his earlier injury, countered with impassioned pleas for full commitment to the alliance. Matriarch Eliazon, ever the voice of moderation, proposed a measured response that balanced Eliani security with support for their allies. The chamber buzzed with conflicting opinions, the unity forged in the face of the recent attack already showing signs of strain. Stephen stepped forward, his presence commanding immediate attention. Honored members of the Grand Assembly, I request permission to address you on this matter. A hush fell over the chamber as the coalition leaders nodded their assent. Stephen took a deep breath, acutely aware of the weight of the moment. Esteemed leaders of Eliani, I stand before you not just as a human diplomat, but as someone who has been changed by my experiences with your people. The Concordat's aggression threatens not just individual worlds, but the fabric of our galactic community. Your advanced technology, particularly your energy manipulation capabilities, could turn the tide of this conflict. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the assembly. I've seen firsthand the power of unity between our peoples. Together, we've faced down threats that neither of us could have overcome alone. Now, our allies need that same unity, that same strength. As Stephen's words resonated through the chamber, Dr. Thorne burst in, his eyes wide with excitement. Counselors, I apologize for the interruption, but I've made a crucial discovery. All eyes turned to the scientist as he activated a holographic display. Our preliminary tests on Stephen and Raya have revealed that their genetic modifications might be the key to developing a weapon against the Concordat's hybrid agents. With access to your advanced bioengineering facilities, we could create a device capable of detecting and neutralizing these operatives. The revelation sent a ripple of murmurs through the assembly. Stephen seized the moment, driving home his point. This is the kind of breakthrough that can only come from our cooperation. Imagine what we could accomplish if we commit fully to this alliance. The Grand Assembly fell silent, weighing the gravity of the decision before them. Finally, Elder Counselor Nexera spoke, her voice carrying the weight of authority. Mr. Richardson, your words have moved us. Dr. Thorne, your discovery offers hope in dark times. I propose we put this matter to a vote. One by one, the coalition members cast their votes. As the final tally was announced, a sense of purpose filled the chamber. The Eliani would commit fully to the alliance, sending a fleet of their advanced warships to aid in the defense of Earth and other allied worlds. They also authorized Dr. Thorne to proceed with the development of the anti-hybrid weapon, dubbed Project Harmony. Stephen and Raya exchanged a look of persistence. We volunteer to lead the Eliani fleet, Raya announced, her crest pulsing with energy. Our unique abilities and experience with both human and Eliani technology make us ideal commanders for this mission. The Assembly approved their appointment, with General Kelvorn assigned as their military advisor. As the meeting adjourned, the complex burst into a flurry of activity. Stephen found himself undergoing intensive training in Eliani ship operations and advanced energy weapon systems. His enhanced neuroplasticity allowing him to absorb the complex information at an astonishing rate. Meanwhile, Raya worked closely with Dr. Thorne and his team, using her enhanced energy manipulation abilities to stabilize the power source of the experimental anti-hybrid device. The laboratories hummed with activity as scientists raced against time to perfect the weapon. Days later, Stephen stood on the bridge of the Eliani flagship, the Stellar Convergence, marveling at its bioorganic design. The ship pulsed with life, responding to his thoughts almost before he could articulate them. Raya joined him, her presence immediately amplifying his connection to the vessel. As the Eliani fleet prepared to depart, Stephen opened a channel to address the assembled ships. Today, we embark on a mission that will shape the future of our galaxy. The road ahead is fraught with danger, but together, there's no challenge we cannot overcome. For Earth, for Eliani, for all free peoples of the galaxy, let's show the Concordat what we're made of. The fleet surged forward, entering the shimmering portal of faster-than-light travel. As the stars streaked past in a dazzling display, Stephen and Raya stood side by side on the bridge, their hands intertwined. The fate of billions rested on their shoulders, but in that moment, they drew strength from each other, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The flashing lights of the stellar convergence's bridge dimmed as the ship emerged from faster-than-light travel. Earth loomed large in the view screen, its familiar blue and green marred by the scars of orbital combat. The Concordat fleet hung in low orbit, a menacing array of sleek warships raining destruction upon the planet below. Stephen's eyes hardened as he surveyed the battlefield. "Status report," he commanded, his voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. General Kelvoran's gravelly voice responded, "Concordat forces have breached Earth's orbital defenses. Their dreadnought is spearheading the assault." Raya stepped forward, her crest pulsing with impossibly strong energy. "We need to take out that dreadnought. It's the key to turning this battle." Stephen nodded, his mind racing through tactical possibilities. "Agreed. We'll lead a strike team to board and neutralize it from within. General, coordinate with Admiral Blackwood to provide cover for our approach." As the Eliani fleet engaged the Concordat forces, Stephen and Raya assembled their strike team, a mix of human and Eliani special forces. The squad gathered in the Stellar Convergence's launch bay, their faces set with commitment. Stephen addressed the team, his enhanced vocal cords projecting clearly over the din of the hangar. "Our mission is twofold. Neutralize the Dreadnought's command center and deploy Dr. Thorne's anti-hybrid weapon. Stay alert, stay alive, and let's remind the Concordat why they should fear this alliance." The strike team boarded their assault shuttle, a sleek vessel designed for stealth and speed. As they approached the massive Concordat dreadnought, Stephen felt Raya's presence in his mind, their symbiotic bond humming with shared focus and energy. The shuttle slipped through a gap in the dreadnought's defenses, latching onto the hull with a muffled thump. Cutting torches flared as the team breached the outer armor, and they poured into the ship's dim corridors. Immediately, they encountered resistance. Concordat soldiers, their movements unnaturally swift and precise, opened fire from defensive positions. Stephen's enhanced reflexes allowed him to duck and weave through the barrage, while Raya's energy manipulation created shields to deflect incoming fire. As they fought their way deeper into the ship, Stephen found himself marveling at the seamless coordination between the human and Eliani members of their team. Months of joint training had forged them into a formidable unit, each member's strengths complementing the others. They battled through multiple decks, the ship's labyrinthine layout a maze of twisting corridors and sealed bulkheads. Stephen's neuroplasticity proved invaluable as he interfaced with the ship's systems, overriding security protocols and guiding the team towards the command center. As they neared their objective, a chilling sight stopped them in their tracks. A vast chamber lined with stasis pods stretched before them, each containing a different alien species in various stages of genetic modification. "By the ancestors," Raya whispered, her crest flattening in horror. "The scale of their hybridization program. It's beyond anything we imagined." Stephen approached one of the pods, his enhanced vision picking out details of the grotesque modifications being performed on the unconscious occupant. "We need to gather as much data as we can. This could be crucial for developing countermeasures." While Stephen worked on breaching the command center's defenses, Raya interfaced with the stasis pod system, her energy manipulation abilities allowing her to sift through vast amounts of data in seconds. The team finally breached the command center, bursting through the doors in a coordinated assault. The Concordat's elite guard put up fierce resistance, their enhanced reflexes and strength making them formidable opponents. In the heat of battle, Stephen felt his connection with Raya intensify. Their movements became perfectly synchronized, each anticipating the other's actions with preternatural accuracy. Together, they cut through the enemy's defenses, their combined abilities turning the tide of the skirmish. With the command center secured, Stephen set to work shutting down the dreadnought's weapons and propulsion systems. His fingers flew over alien control interfaces, his enhanced brain processing the complex systems with remarkable speed. Meanwhile, Raya prepared to deploy Dr. Thorne's anti-hybrid weapon. The device, a marvel of human and Eliani engineering, hummed with potential energy as she calibrated its settings. As Raya activated the weapon, an unexpected surge of energy coursed through the ship. Alarms blared and the deck beneath their feet trembled. The weapon's energy signature is interacting with the ship's power core, Stephen shouted over the cacophony. It's creating a cascading reaction. If we don't contain it, the whole ship could go critical. Stephen and Raya locked eyes, a silent understanding passing between them. Without a word, they moved in perfect unison. Their enhanced abilities pushed to the limit as they worked to contain the growing energy crisis. Stephen's neural interface melded with the ship's systems, rerouting power and isolating critical junctions. Raya's hands danced through the air, her energy manipulation abilities working to disperse the excess power safely. As they struggled against the building energy, a visible aura began to form around them, reminiscent of their experience on the stellar convergence. The air crackled with potential, their combined efforts creating a localized field of controlled chaos. Throughout the ship, the effects of the anti-hybrid weapon began to manifest. Concordat soldiers stumbled, their enhanced abilities faltering as the device's energy signature disrupted their genetic modifications. With a final burst of effort, Stephen and Raya brought the cascading reaction under control. The ship system stabilized and the immediate threat of destruction passed. Breathing heavily, Stephen opened a comm channel to the Eliani fleet. "This is Richardson. We've secured the dreadnought and deployed the weapon, transmitting energy signature now for replication across the battlefield." As the strike team moved to secure the rest of the ship, Stephen and Raya paused for a moment, the intensity of their shared experience washing over them. Their bond, already strong, had deepened in ways they were only beginning to understand. "We did it," Raya said softly, her crest rippling with a mix of exhaustion and elation. Stephen nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "We did, but something tells me this is just the beginning." As they prepared to delve deeper into the captured dreadnought, both knew that the intelligence they would uncover could change the course of the war. The Concordat's secrets lay bare before them, waiting to be unraveled. Uncovered, as Stephen and Raya made their way through the captured dreadnought, cataloging its secrets, a priority message crackled through their comm units. "Richardson, Raya, report to the stellar convergence immediately," Admiral Blackwood's voice commanded. "We have urgent matters to discuss." Exchanging a glance, they swiftly delegated the remaining tasks to their team and boarded the shuttle back to their flagship. Upon arrival, they were ushered into a secure briefing room where Admiral Blackwood, General Kelvorn, and Dr. Thorne awaited them. The air was thick with tension as they entered. Admiral Blackwood's face was grim, her eyes sharp as she regarded the pair. "What you've uncovered on that dreadnought could change the course of this war," she began without preamble. Dr. Thorne stepped forward, his holographic display flickering to life. "The data you retrieved has given us unprecedented insight into the Concordat's hybridization program," he explained, gesturing to the complex genetic sequences floating before them. "But what's truly alarming is the scale of their operation." General Kelvorn's gravelly voice cut in. "They've established multiple research facilities across several galaxies, each specializing in different aspects of genetic manipulation." A star map materialized, pinpointing locations of Concordat bases. One pulsed with particular intensity near the galactic core. "This," Admiral Blackwood said, pointing to the glowing, "is their primary hub. It's where they conduct their most advanced experiments. If we can neutralize this facility, we could cripple their hybrid soldier production." Stephen leaned forward, studying the map. A frontal assault would be suicide. The defenses around a facility that valuable must be immense. Raya nodded in agreement, her crest rippling with concentration. We'd need a more surgical approach. A thin smile crossed Admiral Blackwood's face. Precisely. That's why we're sending you too. The next hours blurred into a whirlwind of mission briefings and preparation. A covert operation was rapidly taking shape, with Stephen and Raya at its core. Their unique abilities and experience made them ideal candidates for the infiltration. As they prepared, Dr. Thorne insisted on conducting additional tests on the pair. Your symbiotic bond continues to evolve, he explained as he attached sensors to their skin. We need to understand its full potential. The results were staggering. Their genetic modifications were adapting, strengthening not only their individual abilities, but their effectiveness as a team. This discovery led to a flurry of new training protocols designed to push their capabilities to the limit. Amidst the preparations, a new face joined their team. Commander Zora Vex strode into the briefing room, her presence immediately commanding attention. With short-cropped silver hair and eyes that seemed to miss nothing, she exuded an aura of covert expertise. Commander Vex will be assisting you on this operation, Admiral Blackwood explained. Her experience in infiltration and black ops will be invaluable. As the trio began their intensive training, Stephen couldn't help but notice the undercurrent of tension running through the Allied forces. Whispered conversations and wary glances between human and Eliani personnel hinted at growing unease. The issue came to a head during a strategy meeting, when an Eliani official voiced concerns about sharing their advanced technology with humans. How can we be certain it won't be misused? He demanded. Stephen saw the fragile alliance teetering on the brink. Acting on instinct, he stepped forward. I propose a cultural exchange program, he suggested. Let's foster understanding between our species, build trust through shared experiences. Raya's eyes lit up, her crest pulsing with excitement. I'll speak with the Eliani coalition government, she offered. My influence should help gain their approval. As the cultural exchange took shape, Stephen and Raya found themselves thrust into the role of unofficial ambassadors. Their unique relationship became a powerful symbol of what humans and Eliani could achieve together. Yet even as they worked to strengthen the alliance, a new threat loomed. Intelligence from the captured dreadnought revealed the Concordat's latest weapon, a bioagent designed to target specific genetic markers in various alien species. Dr. Thorne and his team threw themselves into developing countermeasures, their research heavily influenced by Stephen and Raya's unique genetic properties. Breakthroughs in adaptive immunology offered hope of protection against this insidious new threat. As the day of the infiltration mission drew near, Stephen and Raya underwent a final series of evaluations. During an intense training simulation, something unexpected occurred. Suddenly, Stephen found himself perceiving the environment through Raya's senses, her ability to detect energy fields expanding his awareness in ways he'd never imagined. Did you feel that? Raya gasped, her eyes wide with wonder. Stephen nodded, his palms sweating from the experience. It's like we're sharing our senses somehow. This new development sent ripples of excitement through the Allied leadership. The mission plan was swiftly modified to incorporate this sensory sharing ability, potentially giving them a crucial edge in navigating the heavily guarded Concordat facility. As final preparations were made, Stephen, Raya, and Commander Vex found themselves boarding a sleek stealth ship, its hull designed to slip past the most advanced detection systems. The weight of their mission pressed upon them, the fate of multiple galaxies hanging in the balance. As the ship's engines hummed to life, Stephen felt Raya's hand slip into his. Their eyes met, a silent understanding passing between them. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The stealth ship slipped away from the stellar convergence, vanishing into the vast expanse of space. Their destination, a remote system near the galactic core, where the Concordat's most closely guarded secrets awaited. The mission to infiltrate the heart of the enemy's genetic research program had begun. The stealth ship slipped silently through the vast expanse of space, its advanced cloaking technology rendering it nearly invisible to conventional sensors. Stephen, Raya, and Commander Vex sat in tense silence, their minds focused on the monumental task ahead. As they approached their destination, the ship's long-range sensors suddenly lit up with warnings. Stephen leaned forward, his enhanced vision scanning the readouts with lightning speed. "Multiple Concordat patrols detected," he announced, his voice tight. "Far more than we anticipated." Raya's crest rippled with concern as she studied the tactical display. "Their patrol patterns are too dense. We'll never make it through undetected." Commander Vex's eyes narrowed as she assessed the situation. "We need to alter our course," she said decisively. "There's a region nearby that might offer us cover, the Cerulean Nebula." Stephen raised an eyebrow. The nebula is notorious for interfering with navigation and communication systems. "It's a risky move." "A calculated risk," Vex countered. "But it may be our only option to avoid detection." With a shared nod of agreement, they adjusted their course, the sleek ship banking smoothly as it headed toward the shimmering expanse of the Cerulean Nebula. As they entered the nebula's outer fringes, the ship's systems began to falter. Static crackled through the comm channels, and the navigation console flickered erratically. Stephen and Raya exchanged a glance, their symbiotic bond humming with shared tension. "I think it's time we put our abilities to the test," Raya said, reaching out to take Stephen's hand. As their fingers interlocked, a surge of energy pulsed between them. Stephen gasped as his perception suddenly expanded, Raya's unique ability to sense energy fields flooding his consciousness. The nebula around them transformed into a complex tapestry of swirling currents and eddies. "Incredible," Stephen breathed, his eyes wide with wonder. "I can see the safe paths through the radiation pockets." Together, they guided the ship through the treacherous nebula, their enhanced senses allowing them to navigate the invisible hazards with uncanny precision. Commander Vex watched in amazement as the couple worked in perfect synchronization, their movements fluid and instinctive. Hours passed as they delved deeper into the heart of the nebula. The strain of maintaining their heightened awareness began to show on Stephen and Raya's faces, beads of sweat forming on their brows. Suddenly, a massive shape loomed before them, emerging from the swirling gases of the nebula. The ship's sensors, still struggling against the interference, barely registered its presence. "Evasive maneuvers," Vex shouted, but Stephen raised a hand to stop her. "Wait," he said, his eyes unfocused as he peered through Raya's energy-sensing abilities. "It's not moving. I think it's a derelict vessel." As they drew closer, the true scale of the alien ship became apparent. Its design was unlike anything they had encountered before, its hull etched with intricate patterns that seemed to pulse with residual energy. "This could be an opportunity," Raya said, her crest rippling with excitement. "Who knows what kind of intelligence we might gather from its databanks?" Commander Vex nodded in agreement. "A quick reconnaissance could prove invaluable. Let's dock and investigate, but stay alert. We don't know what we might find aboard." They maneuvered their ship alongside the derelict vessel, magnetic clamps engaging with a dull thud that reverberated through the hull. Stephen, Raya, and Vex donned their protective suits, weapons at the ready as they prepared to board the alien craft. The airlock cycled open, revealing a dimly lit corridor stretching before them. As they stepped aboard, their suit lights illuminated scenes of destruction. Scorch marks on the walls, debris scattered across the floor. "Signs of a battle," Vex observed, her voice low. "And judging by the damage patterns, I'd say it was a Concordat attack." As they moved deeper into the ship, Stephen and Raya began to feel a strange tingling sensation. Their genetic modifications seemed to be reacting to something in the environment, an unfamiliar energy permeating the air around them. "Do you feel that?" Raya asked, her voice filled with a mix of wonder and apprehension. Stephen nodded, his skin prickling with an otherworldly sensation. It's like the ship is reaching out to us somehow. They approached what appeared to be a central computer terminal. As Stephen reached out to touch the alien interface, a surge of energy coursed through him. His eyes widened as complex schematics and data streams flooded his mind, the alien technology interfacing seamlessly with his enhanced neural pathways. I can access their systems, he said, his voice filled with awe. It's like I can speak their language. Raya placed her hand on his shoulder, and instantly, the flood of information doubled. Together, they sifted through vast amounts of data, uncovering critical intelligence about Concordat fleet movements and potential weaknesses in their defenses. Commander Vex worked feverishly beside them, her expertise in data extraction proving invaluable as she downloaded everything she could from the alien ship's memory banks. Their exploration was cut short by a sudden alarm from their suit's sensors. Vex's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing as she checked the readout. Concordat patrol ship approaching, she said sharply. We need to move now. With practiced efficiency, they completed their data extraction, their movements swift and purposeful. As they hurried back to their ship, Stephen and Raya's enhanced senses tingled with residual energy from the alien vessel, their abilities further amplified by the unexpected encounter. They disengaged from the derelict ship just as the Concordat patrol entered sensor range. Using their newly enhanced abilities, Stephen and Raya cloaked their vessel in a shroud of manipulated energy, rendering them invisible to the approaching enemy. As they slipped away undetected, the team began to analyze the wealth of data they had acquired. Among the treasure trove of information, one discovery stood out. Coordinates for a secret Concordat supply route that could provide them with a covert approach to the central hybridization facility. This changes everything, Commander Vex said, a rare smile crossing her face. We may have just found our way in. As they charted their new course through the Cerulean Nebula, Stephen and Raya exchanged a look of drive. Their mission had taken an unexpected turn, but with their enhanced abilities and the critical intelligence they had gathered, they were one step closer to infiltrating the heart of the Concordat's operations. The true test still lay ahead, but they were ready to face whatever challenges awaited them. As they emerged from the Cerulean Nebula, the stealth ship carrying Stephen, Raya, and Commander Vex approached the coordinates of the secret Concordat supply route. The team's enhanced abilities, further amplified by their encounter with the alien vessel, hummed with anticipation. Initiating final approach, Stephen announced, his fingers dancing across the ship's controls. Cloaking systems at maximum efficiency. Raya nodded, her crest pulsing with a mix of excitement and trepidation. I'm detecting multiple Concordat vessels along the route. Our intelligence was correct. Commander Vex studied the tactical display, her eyes narrowing as she formulated their plan. We'll use one of their own cargo ships as cover. Prepare for docking procedures. With practiced precision, they maneuvered their vessel alongside a lumbering Concordat freighter, magnetic clamps engaging silently. As the larger ship continued its journey, the team's stealth craft remained hidden in its shadow, undetected by the numerous patrols guarding the supply route. Hours passed in tense silence as they drew closer to their target. Finally, the massive structure of the Concordat's hybridization facility loomed before them, its sharp angles and pulsing energy fields a stark contrast to the surrounding darkness of space. There's our insertion point, Vex said, indicating a lower hangar bay on the facility's underbelly. Get ready. We'll have to move fast once we're inside. Stephen and Raya exchanged a determined look as they donned their disguises, meticulously crafted Concordat uniforms complete with forged credentials. The familiar weight of their concealed weapons provided a small measure of comfort as they prepared for the dangerous task ahead. As their ship glided into the hangar, masquerading as a routine cargo delivery, Stephen felt a surge of adrenaline course through his veins. The moment they had trained for was finally at hand. The team disembarked swiftly, blending seamlessly with the bustle of activity in the hangar. Stephen's enhanced senses picked up snippets of conversation and the hum of machinery as they made their way towards the facility's interior. "Remember," Vex whispered as they approached the security checkpoint, "act natural. We belong here." Stephen and Raya nodded imperceptibly, their movements casual and unhurried as they presented their forged credentials to the guard. For a heart-stopping moment, the guard's eyes narrowed as he scrutinized the documents. Then, with a curt nod, he waved them through. As they entered the maze-like corridors of the facility, Stephen and Raya activated their sensory-sharing abilities. The world around them transformed, overlaying with a complex web of energy signatures and hidden dangers. "Security patrol approaching from the left," Raya murmured, her eyes unfocused as she scanned their surroundings. "We should take the next right to avoid them." Following her lead, the team navigated through the facility with uncanny precision, avoiding detection at every turn. Commander Vex's expertise guided them through the complex, her knowledge of the layout proving invaluable as they made their way towards the central research area. As they neared their objective, a sudden tingling sensation washed over Stephen and Raya. Their eyes met in alarm as they realized the implications. "Our energy signature," Stephen whispered urgently. "The facility's sensors are picking it up." No sooner had the words left his mouth than a subtle shift in the ambient noise around them signaled the activation of a silent alarm. The team froze, acutely aware that their window of opportunity was rapidly closing. Commander Vex's mind raced, quickly formulating a new strategy. "We need to create a diversion," she said, her voice low and intense. "Multiple security breaches to overwhelm their response teams." Stephen nodded, understanding immediately. "I'll head to the power distribution center. I can use my abilities to interface with their systems and create cascading power fluctuations." "Good," Vex replied. "Raya, you take the environmental control hub. Use your energy manipulation to alter atmospheric conditions throughout the station. I'll make for the main research laboratory to gather critical data." With a shared look of grit, the team split up, each member moving swiftly towards their assigned targets. Stephen navigated the corridors with practiced ease, his enhanced senses allowing him to avoid detection as he made his way to the power distribution center. Upon reaching his destination, Stephen placed his hands on the alien console, feeling the familiar surge of energy as his consciousness merged with the facility's systems. With precise manipulations, he began to sow chaos throughout the station, triggering power fluctuations and system malfunctions across multiple sectors. Meanwhile, Raya had reached the environmental control hub. Her fingers danced across the controls as she used her unique abilities to alter atmospheric conditions in various sections of the facility. Alarms blared as oxygen levels fluctuated and temperature controls went haywire, adding to the growing pandemonium. In the main research laboratory, Commander Vex moved with silent efficiency, her eyes widening as she took in the rows of stasis pods containing partially transformed hybrid beings. The scale of the Concordat's experiments sent a chill down her spine, reinforcing the critical nature of their mission. As Concordat security forces scrambled to respond to the multiple alerts, Stephen and Raya regrouped, their next objective clear: the facility's central computer core. They moved swiftly through the chaos they had created, their shared sensory experiences allowing them to navigate the confusion with ease. As they approached the computer core, a group of imposing figures blocked their path, advanced hybrid soldiers, their augmented bodies thrumming with impossibly strong power. Stephen and Raya exchanged a glance, knowing that the true test of their abilities was about to begin. The hybrid guards moved with inhuman speed, their attacks precise and devastating. Stephen and Raya fell into a seamless rhythm, their symbiotic bond allowing them to anticipate and counter each move. As the battle intensified, they discovered a new dimension to their powers, the ability to momentarily merge their energy fields, creating powerful offensive and defensive capabilities. Stephen noticed with surprise that their symbiotic energy seemed to disrupt the hybrid soldiers' enhanced abilities. This observation filed away for future reference. He redoubled his efforts, working in perfect synchronization with Raya to overcome their formidable opponents. As the last hybrid guard fell, Stephen and Raya stood panting, their bodies humming with residual energy from the intense confrontation. They had little time to catch their breath, however, as an urgent communication from Commander Vex crackled through their earpieces. "Team, we have a situation." Vex's voice was tense with terrifying urgency. "I've discovered plans for a new bioweapon. It's designed to target specific genetic markers across multiple species. If deployed, the casualties would be catastrophic." Stephen and Raya exchanged a grim look, the weight of this new information settling heavily upon them. Their mission parameters had just shifted dramatically, the stakes even higher than they had initially believed. "Change of plans," Stephen replied, his voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. "We need to prioritize the destruction of that bioweapon data." As they entered the central computer core, Stephen began the complex process of uploading their specially designed virus. Beside him, Raya focused her energy manipulation abilities, preparing to create a localized electromagnetic pulse that would erase all data storage devices in the vicinity. The facility's security systems, adapting to their presence, began to throw up increasingly sophisticated defenses. Stephen and Raya worked furiously, constantly adjusting their approach to stay ahead of detection. In another part of the facility, Commander Vex fought her way through waves of Concordat security forces, her movements a blur of lethal efficiency as she made her way back to the rendezvous point. The precious samples of the bioweapon, secured for later analysis, caused great concern in her pack. As alarms blared and the sounds of approaching security forces grew louder, Stephen and Raya pushed their abilities to the limit. The success of their mission, and the fate of countless lives across multiple galaxies, hung in the balance. With the upload nearly complete and Raya's electromagnetic pulse primed for release, they prepared for the final, crucial phase of their operation. The extraction point beckoned, but the path there was far from clear. As Concordat forces closed in from all sides, the team faced their greatest challenge yet. Their mission was not over. It was about to enter its most dangerous phase. Stephen and Raya braced themselves for the final push to escape the facility when a hissing sound filled the air. Thin wisps of green gas began seeping through the ventilation systems, quickly spreading throughout the corridors. "Paralytic gas!" Commander Vex shouted, her eyes widening in alarm. "Cover your faces." Stephen's enhanced physiology kicked in, allowing him to resist the immediate effects of the gas. He quickly reached into his gear, retrieving emergency breathing apparatus for himself and Raya. As he helped Raya secure her mask, he noticed her movements becoming sluggish. "We need to move," Stephen urged, supporting Raya as they continued towards the central computer core. The gas, while not instantly incapacitating, was clearly affecting their motor skills. Each step became a challenge, their limbs growing heavier with every passing moment. As they entered the core chamber, Raya stumbled, nearly falling. Stephen caught her, holding her close as they approached the main console. The physical proximity, combined with the life-or-death nature of their situation, sparked an intense connection between them. "We can do this," Stephen whispered, his voice muffled by the breathing mask. Raya nodded, her eyes conveying a mix of commitment and something deeper. As they began working on the computer systems, Raya's crystal necklace, a gift from her sisters, started to glow with an intense blue light. The alien technology seemed to resonate with the crystal, amplifying Raya's abilities to interface with the facility systems. "Stephen, look," Raya said, her voice filled with wonder despite the dire circumstances. The crystal, It's helping me connect with the mainframe. Stephen's eyes lit up with realization. Use it as a focal point. We can combine our efforts through the crystal. Working in tandem, they channeled their abilities through the glowing crystal. The world around them faded as they immersed themselves in the facility's digital architecture. Lines of code flowed like rivers of light, and energy signatures pulsed with vibrant colors. Together, they began creating a cascading feedback loop within the mainframe. The rare element powering the hybridization experiments started to destabilize, its energy signature fluctuating wildly. Alarms blared as the station's defense systems weakened, but the process was slower than they had anticipated. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the corridors. Concordat security forces were closing in on their position. "We need more time," Raya said, her fingers dancing across the holographic interface. Stephen's mind raced, formulating a plan. "I'll create a diversion. Use the internal transportation system to lead them on a chase." Raya's eyes widened with concern. "That's too dangerous. We should stick together." "It's our only chance," Stephen insisted. "You need to stay here and finish the job. I'll draw them away." Their eyes met, a moment of unspoken communication passing between them. The shared danger, the physical closeness required to combat the gas, and the weight of their mission had forged a bond deeper than either had anticipated. Without warning, Raya pulled Stephen close, their breathing masks clinking together as she pressed her forehead to his. "Come back to me," she whispered. Stephen nodded, his heart racing. As he turned to leave, Raya's crystal pulsed even brighter, its energy seeming to flow between them. Moving as quickly as his gas-affected body would allow, Stephen made his way to the nearest transport tube. He input a series of random destinations, creating a chaotic path through the facility. As he stepped into the tube, he caught a glimpse of Concordat forces rounding the corner. Their shouts of alarm were cut off as the transport whisked him away. Back in the core chamber, Raya redoubled her efforts. The increased energy from her crystal allowed her to make faster progress, but also drew the attention of the facility's central AI. The artificial intelligence, identifying her as the primary threat, began actively countering her moves. Raya gritted her teeth, sweat beading on her forehead as she engaged in a battle of wills with the AI. Each line of code she altered was met with an immediate response, forcing her to adapt and innovate constantly. Meanwhile, Stephen's diversion was working. He led the Concordat forces on a wild chase through the facility, using his enhanced senses to stay just ahead of capture. However, the constant exposure to the paralytic gas was taking its toll. His movements became increasingly sluggish, his vision blurring at the edges. As he stumbled out of a transport tube into a remote section of the facility, Stephen realized he had pushed his luck too far. Concordat soldiers approached from both directions, their weapons trained on him. Just as all seemed lost, a familiar voice crackled over his comm unit. "Need a hand, hotshot?" Commander Vex emerged from a side corridor, her movements fluid and precise despite the gas. With a series of swift, calculated strikes, she incapacitated the nearest soldiers. "Impeccable timing as always, Commander," Stephen said, relief evident in his voice. Vex smirked, tossing him a spare energy weapon. "Can't let you have all the fun. Now, let's keep these bastards busy while Raya works her magic." As Stephen and Vex continued their guerrilla tactics against the Concordat forces, Raya faced her greatest challenge yet. The AI had adapted to her methods, blocking her at every turn. In a moment of inspiration, Raya focused all her energy through the crystal, visualizing a specific pattern. The crystal pulsed, emitting a localized electromagnetic pulse that momentarily disabled the AI's influence over the core systems. Seizing her chance, Raya input the final sequence of commands. The facility shuddered as systems began to fail. The hybridization experiments went offline, and the shields protecting the station flickered ominously. Raya allowed herself a moment of triumph before the reality of their situation set in. They had succeeded in their sabotage, but now they faced an even greater challenge: escaping the facility before it tore itself apart. As alarms blared and emergency lighting bathed the corridors in an eerie red glow, Raya left the core chamber to rendezvous with Stephen and Vex. The real test of their abilities and their newfound bond was just beginning. As the facility shuttered around them, Stephen, Raya, and Commander Vex regrouped, their faces etched with dedication. "We need to move," Vex urged, her eyes scanning the crumbling corridor. "Our extraction point is compromised." They sprinted through the chaos, dodging falling debris and sparking electrical panels. The air grew thick with smoke and the acrid smell of burning circuitry. As they approached the hangar bay, a thunderous crash echoed through the station. Stephen skidded to a halt, his enhanced senses picking up the source of the sound. "The main doors," he said, his voice tight. "They're jammed." Raya's eyes widened. "Our ship dash." "Trapped," Vex finished, her jaw clenching. The trio exchanged grim looks, the gravity of their situation sinking in. They were running out of time and options. Stephen's gaze darted around the corridor, searching for any possible escape route. His eyes landed on a small hatch near the floor, barely visible through the haze of smoke. "There," he said, pointing. "Emergency airlock for maintenance drones." Raya and Vex followed his gaze, understanding dawning on their faces. Without a word, they changed course, making their way towards the potential exit. The journey to the airlock was treacherous. The station's structural integrity was failing rapidly, and they had to navigate through a maze of twisted metal and sparking wires. Raya used her energy manipulation abilities to clear a path, while Stephen's enhanced strength allowed him to move larger obstacles. As they approached the airlock, a group of panicked Concordat personnel stumbled into their path. Vex reacted instantly, her movements fluid and precise as she incapacitated them without breaking stride. Finally reaching the airlock, they discovered a new problem. The small chamber was designed for drones, not humans. It could accommodate 2 of them at most, and even then it would be a tight fit. Commander Vex made a split-second decision. "You too get in," she ordered, her voice brooking no argument. She reached into her pack, withdrawing a sealed container. "Take these. The bioweapon samples. They're too valuable to risk." Stephen opened his mouth to protest, but Vex cut him off. "That's an order, soldier. I'll hold them off and follow as soon as I can." Raya hesitated, her eyes meeting Vex. A moment of understanding passed between them before she nodded, accepting the container. As Stephen and Raya squeezed into the airlock, the sound of approaching Concordat forces grew louder. Vex turned to face the oncoming threat, her stance shifting into a fighting posture. The last thing Stephen and Raya saw before the airlock door sealed was Vex engaging multiple opponents, her movements a blur of lethal efficiency. The airlock cycle began, and suddenly they were ejected into the vast emptiness of space. The silence was absolute, a stark contrast to the chaos they'd just left behind. Using their enhanced abilities, Stephen and Raya propelled themselves through the debris field surrounding the disintegrating facility. In the distance, they could see the flashes of weapons fire as the battle between Admiral Blackwood's fleet and the Concordat forces continued to rage. Their target, an Eliani support ship, seemed impossibly far away. They pushed themselves harder, their bodies straining against the vacuum of space. Halfway to their destination, disaster struck. A piece of shrapnel, moving at incredible speed, grazed Stephen's suit. The impact was small, but in the unforgiving environment of space, it was potentially lethal. His oxygen began to leak, creating a trail of crystallizing bubbles behind him. Raya noticed immediately. Without hesitation, She reached out with her energy manipulation abilities, creating a shimmering force field around Stephen. The field contained his remaining oxygen, but maintaining it taxed Raya's already strained resources. As they approached the Eliani ship, a new threat emerged. The ship's defensive systems, unable to distinguish friend from foe at this range, targeted them with weapons fire. Exhausted and battered, Stephen and Raya were forced to perform a deadly dance, evading both friendly fire and the continuing barrage of debris from the destroyed Concordat facility. In a moment of desperation, Raya's crystal necklace pulsed with energy. The alien artifact, a gift from her sisters, emitted a signal that the Eliani ship recognized as friendly. The weapon's fire ceased, replaced by the gentle pull of a tractor beam. Stephen and Raya crashed into the ship's hangar bay, their momentum barely slowed by the artificial gravity. They lay there for a moment, gasping and trembling with exhaustion and relief. As soon as they caught their breath, they alerted the ship's command about Commander Vex's situation. The Eliani vessel immediately began scanning for her signal, hoping against hope that she had survived the facility's destruction. In the medical bay, Stephen and Raya received treatment for their injuries while providing a rushed debriefing to the ship's captain. The destruction of the Concordat's hybridization facility had turned the tide of the battle. Admiral Blackwood's forces were pressing their advantage, pushing back against the suddenly weakened Concordat fleet. As the adrenaline of their escape faded, Stephen and Raya began to feel the full effects of their ordeal. The paralytic gas, the extreme physical exertion, and the strain of their enhanced abilities had taken a heavy toll. Medical scans revealed alarming instabilities in their genetic modifications. Before they could fully process this new threat, joyous news arrived. Commander Vex had been found. She had managed to commandeer a Concordat escape pod in the chaos and was picked up by a human cruiser. The immediate crisis had passed, but as Stephen and Raya looked at each other, they knew their greatest challenges lay ahead. The bond between them had grown stronger through their shared ordeal, but the physical changes they were undergoing posed new and frightening questions about their future. As the Eliani ship joined the main fleet in pursuit of the retreating Concordat forces, Stephen and Raya faced an uncertain path forward. Their unique abilities had proven crucial in turning the tide of the conflict, but at what cost to themselves? The answer to that question would have to wait, as the battle for the future of multiple species raged on around them. The Eliani ship's engines hummed as it accelerated away from the battle zone, carrying Stephen and Raya towards an uncertain future. Their bodies, racked with pain and exhaustion, trembled as the ship's medical staff worked feverishly to stabilize their conditions. "We're losing them," a medic shouted, his voice tight with urgency. "Their genetic structures are destabilizing at an alarming rate." Stephen reached out, his fingers intertwining with Raya's. A surge of energy pulsed between them, momentarily calming the chaos within their bodies. The medical staff exchanged bewildered glances, their instruments struggling to make sense of the readings. "Captain," the lead medic called out, "we need to get them to Novatera immediately. Our facilities aren't equipped to handle this level of genetic instability." The captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Understood. Plotting a course now. All hands, prepare for high-speed transit." The ship lurched as it changed course, its engines straining as it pushed to maximum velocity. Stephen and Raya clung to each other, their bodies racked with spasms as waves of energy coursed through them. Hours blurred into a haze of pain and fleeting moments of lucidity. The couple drifted in and out of consciousness, their grip on each other never faltering. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the ship's deceleration signaled their arrival at Novatera. As the ship touched down, a team of medical professionals swarmed the landing pad. Among them stood a tall, distinguished man with graying hair and piercing blue eyes. "I'm Dr. Elias Thorne," he announced as Stephen and Raya were rushed from the ship on hovering gurneys. "We're going to do everything we can to help you." The medical complex sprawled before them, a marvel of human and Eliani architecture nestled in a lush valley. Stephen caught glimpses of gleaming white buildings and state-of-the-art equipment as they were whisked through the facility. In the main research wing, Dr. Thorne introduced his team. "This is Dr. Lyra Vex, our xenogenetics expert," he said, gesturing to a woman with familiar features. "She's Commander Vex sister." Dr. Vex nodded, her eyes filled with grit. "Let's get started. We don't have a moment to lose." The next few hours were a blur of tests and scans. Stephen and Raya were poked, prodded, and examined from every conceivable angle. Blood samples were drawn, tissue biopsies taken, and energy readings recorded. As the test progressed, Stephen felt a building pressure in his chest. Without warning, a surge of energy exploded from his body, causing nearby equipment to spark and fizzle. Raya experienced a similar outburst, her skin glowing with an otherworldly light. "Fascinating," Dr. Thorne murmured, examining the readouts. "Their genetic modifications aren't just interacting. They're evolving, adapting to each other's presence." Dr. Vex frowned, her brow furrowed in concentration. "This level of mutation is unprecedented. We need to find a way to stabilize them before the changes become irreversible." The medical team sprang into action, designing a specialized containment chamber to slow the rate of genetic change. Stephen and Raya were separated, placed in adjacent units that hummed with energy-dampening fields. The physical separation was agony. Stephen pressed his hand against the transparent barrier, his eyes locked on Raya's. He could feel the absence of her energy, like a physical ache, a vital part of himself suddenly cut off. Days passed in a haze of tests and treatments. Dr. Thorne and Dr. Vex worked tirelessly, analyzing data and refining their approach. Finally, they called Stephen and Raya together to discuss their findings. "We've developed a potential treatment," Dr. Thorne explained, his voice grave. "Using a modified version of the anti-hybrid weapon, we believe we can target and neutralize the unstable aspects of your genetic modifications." Raya's eyes widened. "But that could strip away everything, couldn't it? Even the beneficial adaptations?" Dr. Vex nodded solemnly. "It's a risk, yes. But without intervention, your conditions will continue to deteriorate." Stephen and Raya exchanged a long look, unspoken words passing between them. Before they could respond, an alarm blared through the facility. The containment units shuddered, their energy fields flickering. "Power fluctuation," a technician shouted. "The containment fields are failing." For a brief moment, the barriers between Stephen and Raya vanished. Their energies surged together, a brilliant flash of light filling the room. When the glow faded, they stood hand in hand, their bodies pulsing with a newfound stability. Dr. Thorne stared at his instruments in disbelief. "Impossible," he breathed. "The reconnection, it's actually stabilized some of the mutations." Dr. Vex's eyes lit up with excitement. "Of course! Their bond isn't just emotional. It's physiological. Controlled exposure to each other's energy fields could be the key to managing their condition." As the medical team rushed to design a new treatment protocol, Stephen and Raya held each other close, their bodies humming with shared energy. They knew the road ahead would be challenging, but for the first time since their ordeal began, they felt a glimmer of hope. The next phase of their treatment was about to begin, and with it, a new chapter in their extraordinary journey. Lives together. As they contemplated their next steps, a holographic display materialized in the center of the room, revealing the stern visage of Admiral Blackwood. "Stephen, Raya," the Admiral's voice crackled with urgency. "I hope I'm not interrupting your recovery, but we have a situation that requires your unique talents." Stephen and Raya exchanged glances, their hands instinctively intertwining. "We're listening, Admiral," Stephen replied. Admiral Blackwood's image flickered as he leaned forward. Our intelligence units have pinpointed the location of a precursor artifact on an uncharted planet, XR7. This artifact could be the key to stabilizing and controlling genetic modifications. Given your unique situation, I believe you're the best candidates for this mission. Raya's eyes widened. A precursor artifact? That could be exactly what we need to understand our condition better. Dr. Thorne stepped forward, his brow furrowed. Admiral, with all due respect, Stephen and Raya are still in a delicate state. We don't know how their bodies will react to. I understand your concerns, Doctor, Blackwood interrupted. But time is of the essence. The Concordat is expanding its reach, and we can't afford to let this opportunity slip through our fingers. Stephen squeezed Raya's hand, feeling the pulse of energy between them. We're in, Admiral. When do we leave? The next few hours were a whirlwind of preparation. Dr. Lyra Vex joined their team, bringing her expertise in xenogenetics and artifact analysis. As they boarded the SSV Shadowhawk, a state-of-the-art stealth vessel, Dr. Thorne handed them each a small device. Portable energy stabilizers, he explained. They should help manage your bond during periods of separation or high stress. Use them wisely. The Shadowhawk's engines hummed to life as they left Novaterra's atmosphere. Stephen and Raya settled into a specially designed chamber for their controlled reconnection sessions. As the ship entered slipspace, they felt the familiar surge of energy between them. Days passed in a blur of preparation and increasingly intense reconnection sessions. During one particularly powerful surge, the ship's lights flickered and alarms blared. Power fluctuation in sections 3 through 7. A crew member shouted over the intercom. Dr. Vex rushed to the chamber, her eyes wide as she observed the visible energy discharges emanating from Stephen and Raya. Fascinating, she murmured, quickly adjusting settings on a nearby console. We'll need to develop new protocols to safeguard critical systems during these sessions. As they approached XR7, the ship's long-range scanners painted a grim picture of their destination. The planet's surface roiled with seismic activity, while unpredictable weather patterns lashed its barren landscape. We have a narrow window for safe landing, the pilot announced. It's now or never. Stephen led the ground team out of the Shadowhawk, the toxic atmosphere swirling around their environmental suits. Raya followed close behind, with Dr. Vex and a small group of operatives bringing up the rear. The planet's surface was a hellscape of jagged rocks and steaming fissures. As they navigated the treacherous terrain, Stephen's enhanced senses prickled. "Movement 2 o'clock," he whispered into his comm. A serpentine creature, easily twice their size, slithered from behind a rock formation. Its scales glistened with an oily sheen as it reared up, preparing to strike. Raya reacted instantly, her hands glowing with concentrated energy. She unleashed a pulse that sent the creature reeling backward, giving the team time to skirt around its territory. Dr. Vex consulted her scanner as they approached a series of weathered stone columns. The artifact signature is strongest here. There must be an entrance somewhere. Stephen closed his eyes, focusing on the faint hum of energy he could feel beneath their feet. He placed his hand on one of the columns, and a surge of power flowed through him. The ground trembled, and a hidden doorway slid open, revealing a descending passageway. As they entered the ancient structure, the harsh external environment gave way to an eerily stable interior. An unknown energy field shimmered around them, creating a protective bubble. This technology, it's beyond anything I've ever seen, Dr. Vex breathed, her scanner beeping frantically. They pressed deeper into the facility, Stephen and Raya's hybrid physiology seemingly activating dormant systems as they passed. Holographic displays flickered to life, showcasing complex genetic sequences and hybridization techniques that made even Dr. Vex gasp in amazement. The central chamber opened before them, dominated by a massive, pulsating crystalline structure. As Stephen and Raya approached, The artifact emitted a blinding pulse of energy that enveloped them both. Stephen felt his body changing, his senses sharpening beyond anything he'd experienced before. Beside him, Raya's skin shimmered with an otherworldly glow, her eyes blazing with newfound power. The artifact. "It's responding to your hybrid DNA," Dr. Vex said, her voice filled with awe and scientific curiosity. "Quick, we need to document everything we can." As Dr. Vex worked feverishly to analyze the artifact, Stephen and Raya explored the facility with their temporarily enhanced abilities. They uncovered vast databases of genetic information, each discovery more groundbreaking than the last. Their exploration was cut short by an urgent transmission from the Shadowhawk. "Ground team, be advised. We've detected a Concordat, scouting vessel entering the system. They'll be in orbit within the hour." Stephen's mind raced, assessing their options. "Dr. Vex, how much longer do you need?" "The download is at 60%, she replied, her fingers flying over her equipment. "We need at least another 20 minutes to secure the artifact for transport." Raya's eyes met Stephen's, a silent understanding passing between them. "We'll buy you that time," she said, her voice resonating with newfound strength. As Dr. Vex worked to secure their prize, Stephen and Raya prepared for the fight of their lives. The fate of the mission, and perhaps the entire war effort, rested on their ability to harness their enhanced abilities and outwit the approaching Concordat forces. With the clock ticking and the enemy closing in, they steeled themselves for the challenges ahead, knowing that failure was not an option. An option. As Stephen and Raya steeled themselves for the impending confrontation, the facility around them began to shudder. "Download complete," Dr. Vex announced, her voice tight with urgency. "We need to move now." Stephen nodded, his enhanced senses already picking up the distant rumble of approaching engines. "Let's go. We'll take point." They raced through the deteriorating corridors, ancient technology sparking and failing around them. Raya's newfound abilities allowed her to anticipate structural weaknesses, guiding the team safely past collapsing sections. As they emerged from the facility, the harsh landscape of XR-7 greeted them, along with the unwelcome sight of a Concordat dropship touching down less than a kilometer away. "Shadowhawk, this is ground team," Stephen called into his comm. "We need immediate extraction. Hostiles inbound." The response came through garbled with static. "Copy. Round team. Dessen. Rui. B. Advi. Loking compromised." Dr. Vex's eyes widened as she glanced at her instruments. "The artifact's energy signature. It's disrupting our systems." A squad of Concordat soldiers crested a nearby ridge, weapons at the ready. Stephen and Raya moved in perfect synchronization, their enhanced abilities allowing them to react with superhuman speed and precision. Raya thrust her hands forward, generating a shimmering energy barrier that deflected the first volley of enemy fire. Stephen countered with a focused burst of energy that disabled the Concordat soldiers' weapons without harming the operators. As the team pushed forward, Dr. Vex worked feverishly to stabilize the pulsing crystalline artifact. "The energy emissions are becoming erratic," she warned. "We need to contain it before." Her words were cut short as a gravitational distortion rippled outward from the artifact, sending loose debris swirling into the air. Stephen and Raya locked eyes, a wordless plan forming between them. They positioned themselves on either side of Dr. Vex, channeling their combined energy to create a stabilizing field around the volatile crystal. The Shadowhawk descended through the planet's turbulent atmosphere, its outline flickering as the cloaking technology struggled against the artifact's interference. As the ship touched down, another wave of Concordat forces arrived, their weapons trained on the exposed vessel. "Go!" Stephen shouted to the rest of the team. "We'll cover you." Dr. Vex and the operative sprinted for the Shadowhawk's lowered ramp, the precious data storage devices clutched tightly in their hands. Stephen and Raya moved in tandem, their abilities amplified by their connection to the artifact. They wove an intricate dance of energy manipulation, redirecting enemy fire and creating localized gravity wells to disrupt the Concordat's formations. As the last team member boarded, Stephen and Raya made a final push towards the ship. The strain of maintaining the artifact's containment field while engaged in combat was evident on their faces, beads of sweat mixing with the toxic atmosphere that seeped through their compromised environmental suits. They had barely set foot on the ramp when the Concordat vessel hovering above opened fire, targeting the Shadowhawk's engines. Without hesitation, Stephen and Raya extended their protective field around the entire ship, their combined power deflecting the incoming barrage. "We can't take another hit like that," the pilot's voice crackled over the ship's speakers. "Initiating emergency takeoff sequence." As the Shadowhawk lifted off, Stephen and Raya maintained their defensive barrier, their bodies trembling with the effort. Dr. Vex rushed to their side, her medical scanner beeping frantically. "Your cellular structure is destabilizing," she said, her voice infused with concern. "You need to disengage now." Stephen gritted his teeth, sweat pouring down his face. "Not until we're clear of the atmosphere." The ship shuddered as it punched through layers of turbulent air, the Concordat vessel in hot pursuit. Alarms blared throughout the Shadowhawk, warning of multiple system failures. In a moment of desperate inspiration, Stephen turned to Raya. "The ship's systems. I think we can—" She nodded, understanding immediately. Together, they shifted their focus, merging their enhanced consciousness with the Shadowhawk's computer core. The ship's engines roared with newfound power, executing maneuvers that defied its design specifications. The pursuing Concordat vessel fell behind, unable to match the Shadowhawk's impossible speed and agility. As they approached the jump point for faster-than-light travel, Stephen and Raya's connection to the ship began to falter. Energy levels critical, an automated voice announced. "FTL jump initiating in 5, 4. With a final surge of effort, Stephen and Raya pushed the ship's systems to their absolute limit. The Shadowhawk vanished into hyperspace mere seconds before the Concordat ship could reacquire its target. As the blue-shifted stars of FTL travel filled the viewports, Stephen and Raya collapsed to the deck. Their bodies, pushed far beyond their natural limits, began to show signs of rapid cellular degeneration. Dr. Vex was at their side in an instant, barking orders to her medical team. "Get them to the med bay now. Initiate stasis protocols and prepare for emergency genetic stabilization." As Stephen and Raya were rushed away, their hands instinctively reaching for each other even in unconsciousness, the Shadowhawk's systems began to fluctuate wildly. The Precursor artifact, still pulsing with otherworldly energy, interfered with the ship's delicate FTL calculations. The pilot's voice came over the intercom, strained and urgent. "All hands, brace for emergency real space reversion. We can't maintain stable FTL flight." The ship shuddered violently as it dropped back into normal space, its hull groaning under the stress. Warning klaxons blared throughout the vessel, signaling multiple critical failures. In the med bay, Dr. Vex worked frantically to stabilize Stephen and Raya's deteriorating condition. Her hands flew over the controls, inputting complex genetic sequences derived from the newly acquired Precursor data. "Come on," she muttered, her eyes fixed on the fluctuating vital signs displayed above each stasis pod. "Fight this. We've come too far to lose you now." On the bridge, the crew battled to keep the Shadowhawk functional. Energy surges from the artifact played havoc with navigation and life support systems. The ship limped towards the coordinates of the nearest Allied base, each moment a struggle against total systems failure. As they approached their destination, a final, massive energy pulse from the artifact threatened to overload the Shadowhawk's already strained power core. Alarms screamed throughout the ship, warning of imminent core breach. The pilot's voice, tight with barely controlled panic, came over the ship-wide comm. All hands, prepare for emergency landing procedures. This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill. With the Allied base growing larger in the view screen and time running out, the crew of the Shadowhawk raced against the clock. The fate of the mission, the invaluable Precursor artifact, and the lives of Stephen and Raya all hung in the balance as the ship began its desperate final approach. Descent towards the Allied base. The ship's hull groaned under the immense stress, warning lights flashing across every console as the pilot fought to maintain control. Brace for impact! The pilot's voice echoed through the intercom, strained with effort. The Shadowhawk slammed onto the landing pad, its landing gear barely absorbing the shock. Sparks flew as metal scraped against metal, and the ship skidded to a halt, leaving a trail of debris in its wake. Emergency crews swarmed the vessel before the engines had fully powered down. They deployed energy-dampening fields around the ship, containing the erratic pulses emanating from the Precursor artifact. Inside the med bay, Dr. Vex worked feverishly to stabilize Stephen and Raya's life support systems. As soon as the ship's ramp lowered, she directed her team to move the stasis pods. Careful with those power couplings, she barked, her eyes never leaving the fluctuating vital signs on her handheld scanner. The medical team rushed the unconscious couple through the base's corridors, their footsteps echoing off the sterile walls. They burst into a specialized facility prepared by Admiral Blackwood, filled with cutting-edge medical equipment. Dr. Vex's fingers flew over the controls of 2 separate stasis chambers. Initiating cellular stabilization sequence, she announced, her voice tight with concentration. Adjusting energy field parameters to match their unique physiology. As Stephen and Raya were secured in their respective chambers, a team of Xenotech specialists led by Dr. Elias Thorne entered the adjacent lab. They carefully maneuvered the pulsing Precursor artifact into a heavily shielded containment unit. Engaging multiphasic dampening field, Dr. Thorne called out, his eyes fixed on the readouts scrolling across his tablet. Energy signature is stabilizing. We've got it under control for now. Days passed in a flurry of activity. Dr. Vex and her team worked around the clock, analyzing the genetic data recovered from the Precursor facility and developing targeted treatments for Stephen and Raya. In the neighboring lab, Dr. Thorne made significant progress in understanding the artifact's properties. On the 5th day, Dr. Thorne burst into the medical bay, his eyes wide with excitement. Dr. Vex, I've made a breakthrough. The crystal responds to specific energy frequencies. We can control its activation. Dr. Vex looked up from her work, dark circles under her eyes betraying her exhaustion. That's incredible, Elias. How does this affect our patients? We can use this knowledge to create a stabilizing field for Stephen and Raya, Dr. Thorne explained, pulling up a holographic display. It should help regulate their energy levels during the recovery process. With renewed vigor, the 2 teams worked together to implement Dr. Thorne's findings. They set up a specialized recovery room, equipped with energy dampeners and the prototype device that could harness the artifact's power safely. As Stephen's vital signs strengthened, Dr. Vex prepared to bring him out of stasis. She carefully adjusted the controls, monitoring every fluctuation in his bioreadings. Stephen's eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first. He gasped, his body tensing as he became aware of his surroundings. "Raya," he croaked, his voice hoarse from disuse. Instinctively, he reached out, causing a surge in his energy levels. Alarms blared, and Dr. Vex quickly moved Raya's stasis chamber closer. The effect was immediate. Both Stephen and Raya's readings stabilized as their energy fields synchronized. Raya regained consciousness shortly after, her eyes locking onto Stephen's. A silent communication passed between them, a mixture of relief and concern. Dr. Vex approached the couple, her scanner hovering over them. "How are you feeling?" she asked, studying the readouts intently. "Different," Stephen replied, flexing his fingers. Stronger, but unstable. Raya nodded in agreement. It's like there's a storm inside us, barely suppressed. That's to be expected, Dr. Vex explained. Your genetic structure has been significantly altered. We've managed to halt the cellular decay, but you'll need regular energy exchanges to maintain stability. Before the couple could fully process this information, Admiral Blackwood entered the room. Her expression was grim as she addressed the group. I'm glad to see you both awake. However, we have a situation developing. She activated a holographic display, showing a massive Concordat fleet approaching the system. Long-range sensors detected them an hour ago. This is no scouting party. They're coming in force. Stephen attempted to sit up, wincing at the effort. We need to help. Our abilities are still unstable and potentially dangerous, Dr. Vex interjected, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. Admiral Blackwood nodded. Dr. Vex is right. However, we may not have a choice. Dr. Thorne, is the artifact secure for transport? Yes, Admiral, Dr. Thorne replied. We can move it at a moment's notice. Good. Dr. Vex, I need you to prepare Stephen and Raya for potential combat. Use whatever experimental treatments you have to boost their abilities safely. As the medical team sprang into action, alarms blared throughout the base. The Admiral's voice came over the intercom, ordering all personnel to battle stations. Stephen and Raya exchanged a determined look as Dr. Vex approached with a set of injectors. The doctor's face was a mask of concentration as she administered the experimental treatment. This should temporarily enhance your abilities without causing further cellular damage, she explained. But be careful. We don't know the full extent of your powers or their limitations. As the drugs coursed through their systems, Stephen and Raya felt a surge of energy unlike anything they had experienced before. The room seemed to sharpen into focus, and they could sense the ebb and flow of power around them. Admiral Blackwood returned, her uniform now bearing the marks of battle readiness. Our defenses are online, and Allied ships are moving into position. Are you two ready? Stephen stood, his body humming with barely held back energy. Raya joined him, their hands intertwining as they faced the Admiral. We're ready, they said in unison, their voices resonating with newfound strength. As they made their way to the command center, the first waves of Concordat ships entered the system. Weapons fire lit up the space around the Allied base, and the battle for the Precursor artifact began in earnest. Stephen and Raya stood at the heart of the Allied defenses, their enhanced senses taking in the chaos of the battlefield. With the fate of the war potentially hanging in the balance, they prepared to unleash their newfound powers against the incoming Concordat forces. The command center buzzed with activity as Stephen and Raya stepped onto the bridge, their bodies crackling with terrifying energy. Admiral Blackwood turned to them, her face etched with dedication. We've detected the Concordat fleet entering the system. Our defenses are ready, but we'll need every advantage we can get. Stephen nodded, his enhanced senses already picking up the distant flashes of weapons fire. We're ready, Admiral. Just tell us where you need us. Dr. Vex approached, holding two sleek, form-fitting flight suits. These are designed to help regulate your energy output during combat, she explained, handing them to the couple. They'll also provide real-time biometric data to our systems. As Stephen and Raya donned the suits, they felt a subtle hum of energy coursing through the material. Dr. Vex continued her briefing. We've modified a two-seater fighter specifically for your abilities. The neural interfaces should allow you to control the ship as an extension of yourselves. The base shuddered as the first volley of Concordat fire struck the shields. Admiral Blackwood's voice rang out over the intercom, ordering all personnel to battle stations. It's time, she said, turning to Stephen and Raya. Get to your fighter and join the defense. We're counting on you. The couple sprinted through the corridors, their enhanced reflexes allowing them to navigate the chaos of a base preparing for battle with ease. They reached the hangar just as a squadron of Allied fighters launched, streaking into the star-filled sky. Their modified fighter stood apart from the others, its sleek lines and pulsing energy conduits hinting at the advanced technology within. As they climbed into the cockpit, the neural interfaces activated, creating an instant connection between the pilots and their craft. Stephen's hands wrapped around the controls, and he felt as if the fighter had become an extension of his own body. Beside him, Raya's eyes closed in concentration as she interfaced with the ship's sensor and weapon systems. Shadowhawk 1, you are clear for launch, the flight controller's voice crackled over the comm. The fighter's engines roared to life, and Stephen guided it out of the hangar with a precision that defied normal piloting capabilities. As they soared into space, the full scope of the battle came into view. The Concordat fleet filled the horizon, a mass of warships advancing inexorably toward the Allied base. Fighters from both sides engaged in furious dogfights, their energy weapons painting streaks of light across the void. Stephen and Raya's fighter accelerated into the fray, moving with a fluidity that caught even their own allies off guard. Through their symbiotic bond, they communicated without words, anticipating each other's actions with perfect synchronicity. A group of Concordat fighters broke off to intercept them, opening fire with a barrage of energy bolts. Stephen wove through the attack with impossible grace, while Raya returned fire with pinpoint accuracy. Two enemy ships erupted into fireballs, while the others scattered, clearly unnerved by the display of skill. As they pressed their attack, Stephen and Raya became aware of a shift in the Concordat strategy. "They're splitting their forces," Raya announced, her enhanced perception picking up on the subtle movements of the enemy fleet. Stephen nodded, already adjusting their course. "The main force is continuing the frontal assault, but a smaller group is trying to flank us." Without needing to be told, they broke away from the main engagement, streaking toward the flanking force. Their fighter moved with such speed and agility that it seemed to defy the laws of physics, leaving both Allied and enemy pilots in awe. As they engaged the Concordat's flanking group, Stephen and Raya's abilities reached new heights. A shimmering energy field manifested around their fighter, deflecting incoming fire and allowing them to execute maneuvers that would have torn a normal ship apart. The couple's coordinated assault disrupted the Concordat's carefully planned flanking maneuver, buying precious time for Allied reinforcements to reposition. Ship after ship fell to their precise attacks, unable to match the fusion of human intuition, Eliani technology, and their newly enhanced abilities. Back at the base, Dr. Vex's eyes widened as she analyzed the incoming data from Stephen and Raya's flight suits. "Admiral," she called out, her voice tight with excitement and concern. "Their genetic structure is continuing to evolve. The combat stress is accelerating the integration of the Precursor modifications." Admiral Blackwood absorbed this information, her tactical mind already formulating a new strategy. She turned to Dr. Thorne, who had just entered the command center. "Doctor, how quickly can we get the Precursor artifact to Stephen and Raya's fighter?" Dr. Thorne blinked in surprise, but quickly recovered. "We can modify a transport pod for secure artifact transfer in about 20 minutes. But Admiral, the risks dash." "We don't have the luxury of caution," Blackwood interrupted. "Prepare the artifact for transport. If we can amplify Stephen and Raya's abilities further, it might be our only chance to turn the tide of this battle." As Dr. Thorne hurried to carry out the Admiral's orders, Blackwood opened a secure channel to Stephen and Raya's fighter. "Shadowhawk 1, we're sending you a package. It's the Precursor artifact. We believe it may enhance your capabilities even further." Stephen's voice came back, tense with the strain of combat. "Understood, Admiral. We'll be ready." Minutes later, a heavily shielded transport pod launched from the base, escorted by a squadron of Allied fighters. Stephen and Raya disengaged from their current dogfight, executing a series of complex maneuvers to rendezvous with the transport while avoiding Concordat fire. As the pod came alongside their fighter, Raya extended the ship's energy field, creating a safe corridor for the artifact's transfer. The moment the Precursor relic was secured aboard, a surge of power unlike anything they had experienced before coursed through the ship and its pilots. The fighter's hull began to reshape itself, becoming more organic in appearance, with lines of energy pulsing along its surface. Stephen and Raya gasped in unison as their connection to the ship deepened, granting them an intuitive understanding of capabilities they never knew existed. With newfound power thrumming through their vessel, Stephen and Raya turned to face the heart of the Concordat fleet. Their fighter moved with impossible speed, leaving afterimages in its wake as it unleashed precisely targeted energy pulses that disabled enemy ships with frightening efficiency. Admiral Blackwood, watching the battle unfold on the command center's main display, allowed herself a small smile. "All Allied ships, fall back and provide support to Shadowhawk 1, she ordered. "Focus on protecting the base. Let them lead the charge." As Stephen and Raya carved a path of destruction through the Concordat fleet, Dr. Vex's voice came through their comm, tight with worry. "Your bio readings are off the charts. The energy you're channeling, it's putting immense strain on your bodies. You need to be careful." But the couple pressed on, their minds one with each other in their ship as they pushed toward the Concordat's massive command vessel. Enemy ships fell before them or turned to flee, their retreat cut off by the lightning-fast maneuvers of the enhanced fighter. Stephen and Raya felt the power building within them, reaching a crescendo as they approached their final target. They knew, without words, what needed to be done. Combining their abilities, they began to form a lance of pure energy, powerful enough to pierce the strongest shields. Their fighter streaked toward the Concordat command ship, trailing streamers of light as the hybrid of human, Eliani, and Precursor technology prepared to unleash its full potential. The fate of the battle, perhaps the entire war, would be decided in the next few moments. As they closed in on their target, alarms blared in the cockpit, warning of critical system overloads. Stephen and Raya paid them no heed, their focus absolute as they prepared to strike the decisive blow against the heart of the Concordat fleet. The fate of the battle, perhaps the entire war, would be decided in the next few moments. As they closed in on their target, alarms blared in the cockpit, warning of critical system overloads. Stephen and Raya paid them no heed, their focus absolute as they prepared to strike the decisive blow against the heart of the Concordat. The energy lance, a brilliant spear of pure power, shot forth from their fighter. It pierced through the Concordat command ship's shields with minimal resistance. The impact was catastrophic, sending cascades of explosions rippling along the massive vessel's hull. Stephen and Raya watched in awe as their attack tore through the command ship's main systems. Fires erupted across its surface, and secondary explosions blossomed in its wake. The Concordat flagship, once the pinnacle of their military might, now drifted helplessly in space. The effect on the rest of the Concordat fleet was immediate. Ships began to break formation, their coordinated assault dissolving into chaos. Without central command, the enemy vessels scattered, some attempting to regroup, while others fled outright. But the couple's moment of triumph was short-lived. Their fighters shuddered violently, systems failing one after another. The enormous energy output had taken its toll, and now their ship was paying the price. "We're losing power," Stephen shouted, his hands flying over the controls as he tried to stabilize their craft. Raya's eyes darted across the sensor readouts, her face pale. "Our energy core is destabilizing. We can't contain it." As their fighter drifted powerless in space, Stephen and Raya felt the change within their own bodies. The energy that had fueled their incredible abilities now turned inward, wreaking havoc on their cellular structure. Pain lanced through them, and they clutched each other's hands, their bodies emitting pulses of uncontrolled energy. Back at the Allied base, alarms blared in the command center. Dr. Vex's voice cut through the chaos, her tone urgent. Admiral, Stephen and Raya's vital signs are going haywire. We need to get them back here immediately. Admiral Blackwood didn't hesitate. Launch Rescue Team Alpha. Priority 1. Retrieve Shadowhawk 1 and its pilots. As the rescue ship sped towards the stricken fighter, Dr. Vex worked furiously at her console, the energy readings from their bodies. It's unlike anything we've seen before. We can't bring them aboard a standard vessel. Dr. Thorne stepped in, his mind racing. The stasis pods from Project Lazarus. If we modify them with energy-dampening fields. Do it, Blackwood ordered, and make it fast. The rescue team approached Stephen and Raya's fighter with caution. Through the cockpit, they could see the pilots' bodies glowing with coruscating energy, threatening to lash out at any moment. This is Rescue 1, the team leader reported. We're preparing to extract the targets. Standing by for further instructions. Dr. Vex's voice crackled over the comm. Use extreme caution. The modified stasis pods are your only safe option for transport. Get them inside as quickly as possible. The team worked with practiced efficiency, maneuvering the pods alongside the damaged fighter. As they opened the cockpit, a wave of energy washed over them, shorting out some of their equipment. Hurry, the team leader shouted. We're losing containment. With painstaking care, they transferred Stephen and Raya into the stasis pods. The moment the seals closed, the energy-dampening fields activated, stabilizing the volatile emissions from their bodies. Target secure, Rescue 1 reported. Returning to base. As the rescue ship sped back to the Allied base, the remaining Concordat vessels fled the system, leaving behind a graveyard of destroyed ships. The Allied forces began the process of securing the area, but all eyes were on the returning rescue ship. The moment they touched down, medical teams swarmed the landing bay. Dr. Vex directed the transfer of Stephen and Raya's stasis pods to a specially prepared containment chamber. Get them inside now, she ordered. We need to start the stabilization process immediately. Inside the chamber, which hummed with the energy of Dr. Thorne's harvester prototype, the medical team worked tirelessly. They monitored every fluctuation in Stephen and Raya's vital signs, adjusting the chamber's settings to slowly dissipate the excess energy coursing through their bodies. Days passed, and gradually, the violent energy emissions began to subside. Dr. Vex pored over the data, her eyes widening as she realized the extent of the changes in their genetic structure. Admiral, she reported, their DNA. It's still evolving. The Precursor genetic code is integrating further than we ever thought possible. Blackwood absorbed this information, her tactical mind already racing. What does this mean for their abilities? It's hard to say, Dr. Vex admitted, but if they survive this transformation, they could possess powers beyond our current understanding. As Stephen and Raya lay in their coma-like state, their bodies undergoing rapid cellular changes, Admiral Blackwood made a decision that would shape the course of the war. We need to understand this, she declared. Establish a new research facility. Codename, Project Synthesis. I want our best minds working on this, human and Eliani alike. While the new facility took shape, Allied forces combed through the debris field left by the battle. Intact components from Concordat ships provided a treasure trove of intelligence, and engineering teams worked around the clock to unlock their secrets. 2 weeks after the battle, Dr. Vex noticed a change in Stephen and Raya's readings. Their brain activity is normalizing, she announced. I think they're waking up. As Stephen's eyes fluttered open, his first instinct was to reach for Raya. Their hands touched, and a visible ripple of energy flowed between them. The medical team watched in amazement as this energy exchange seemed to accelerate their recovery. Admiral Blackwood entered the room, her face a mixture of relief and commitment. "Welcome back," she said softly. "We have a lot to discuss." Stephen and Raya looked at each other, then back at the Admiral. They could feel the change in their bodies, the new power humming just beneath their skin. Whatever had happened to them, they knew their journey was not nearly finished. As they prepared to hear the Admiral's report, Stephen and Raya interlaced their fingers, drawing strength from each other. The battle might be won, but they sensed that their greatest challenges still lay ahead. The transformation they had undergone was just the beginning of a new chapter in their lives and in the war against the Concordat. Admiral Blackwood's eyes gleamed with a mixture of concern and commitment as she began her briefing. "We've uncovered intelligence about a hidden Concordat outpost," she said, her voice low and urgent. "This facility may hold crucial information about their fleet movements and future plans. We need you two to infiltrate it." Stephen and Raya exchanged a glance, their newly heightened senses allowing them to communicate volumes without a word. They nodded in unison, ready to face this new challenge. The following days were a whirlwind of intense preparation. Project Synthesis had designed a series of rigorous training simulations to push the limits of Stephen and Raya's evolved abilities. In one exercise, they navigated a holographic maze filled with simulated Concordat security measures, using their energy manipulation powers to bypass barriers and remain undetected. Dr. Thorne's team outfitted them with cutting-edge stealth suits, sleek and form-fitting, with a surface that seemed to ripple and shift like oil on water. As Stephen slipped his on, he felt it conform to his body, sensing and adapting to his energy signature. "These suits will help you control and channel your powers," Dr. Thorne explained, making final adjustments. "They also incorporate Precursor tech to mask your presence from Concordat sensors." Meanwhile, Dr. Vex conducted a battery of tests, her brow furrowed in concentration as she analyzed the results. "Your genetic structure has stabilized," she informed them, "but we need to ensure you remain stable throughout the mission." She produced a pair of tiny, iridescent devices. "These nanoscale implants will monitor your vitals and administer emergency treatments if needed." As the day of the mission approached, Stephen and Raya found themselves aboard a modified stealth ship. Its sleek lines and matte black surface hinted at the advanced technology within. Dr. Thorne gave them a final briefing on the ship's capabilities, including its Precursor-derived cloaking system and long-range scanners. Just before their departure, Dr. Thorne presented them with one last piece of equipment, a miniaturized version of the Precursor artifact energy harvester. "Use this only in emergencies," he warned. "It can amplify your abilities, but the strain on your bodies could be severe." The stealth ship slipped away from the Allied base, its cloaking technology rendering it virtually invisible. Stephen and Raya sat at the controls, their enhanced senses stretched to their limits as they guided the vessel through Concordat-controlled space. Days passed in tense silence as they navigated a treacherous path, avoiding patrol routes and weaving through debris fields. Finally, their target came into view, a massive space station built into an asteroid, dripping with defensive systems and swarming with patrol ships. Stephen and Raya exchanged a determined look as they donned their stealth suits and prepared for EVA. The airlock hissed open, exposing them to the vast emptiness of space. With practiced coordination, they propelled themselves towards the station using controlled bursts of energy, their suits adjusting constantly to mimic the surrounding space debris. As they approached the station's outer hull, Stephen focused his energy on a maintenance hatch. The metal seemed to ripple and flow under his touch, creating an opening without triggering any alarms. They slipped inside, finding themselves in a dimly lit corridor. Moving silently through the maze-like interior of the outpost, Stephen and Raya relied on their heightened senses to avoid detection. They could hear the heartbeats of approaching guards, feel the vibrations of security cameras swiveling in their direction. Suddenly, Raya tensed. "Something's wrong," she whispered. "I'm sensing." Something different. Around the corner, they encountered a new threat: Concordat hybrid soldiers with enhanced sensory capabilities. These beings moved with an eerie, fluid grace, their eyes darting about as if they could see through walls. Stephen and Raya pressed themselves against the wall, concentrating intensely. They manipulated the energy around them, creating localized distortions that confused the hybrid soldiers' senses. The creatures passed by, their faces contorted in confusion. Finally, they reached the central data core, a massive column of pulsing light and circuitry. Stephen interfaced with the system, his mind racing as he sifted through terabytes of data. Beside him, Raya stood guard, her senses alert for any approach. "I found it," Stephen muttered, his eyes glowing with reflected data streams. Fleet movements, future plans, and... Wait, there's something else. Project Nexus? Before they could investigate further, alarms blared throughout the facility. They had triggered a silent alert, and now Concordat forces were converging on their position. "We need to move," Raya urged, her body tensing for action. Stephen nodded, rapidly downloading the remaining data. As the first wave of security forces rounded the corner, he and Raya shared a look of dogged tenacity. It was time to put their training and their newfound powers to the ultimate test. Stephen and Raya moved in perfect synchronization, their bodies pulsing with energy as they faced the oncoming Concordat forces. With a shared glance, they unleashed a wave of power that sent their attackers reeling backward. "We need to get back to the ship," Stephen said, his voice tight with urgency. Raya nodded, her eyes scanning for an escape route. "This way," she said, pointing to a maintenance shaft. They sprinted down the corridor, their enhanced senses allowing them to anticipate and avoid incoming fire. As they reached the shaft, Stephen placed his hand on the sealed entrance. The metal rippled and parted under his touch, creating an opening just large enough for them to slip through. Inside the narrow passageway, they moved swiftly, their bodies glowing faintly in the darkness. The sound of pursuing forces echoed behind them, growing fainter as they put distance between themselves and their attackers. Finally, they emerged near the docking bay where their stealth ship waited. As they approached, Raya suddenly stumbled, her face contorted in pain. "Raya!" Stephen caught her before she fell. "What's wrong?" "The energy," she gasped. "It's overwhelming." Stephen felt it too, a building pressure within their bodies, threatening to burst free. He remembered Dr. Thorne's warning about the strain their new abilities could cause. "We need to get to the ship," he said, supporting Raya as they staggered forward. "The dampening field should help stabilize us." They reached the ship just as another wave of Concordat forces burst into the hangar. Stephen quickly initiated the launch sequence while Raya manned the weapon system, holding off their pursuers long enough for the ship to lift off. As they broke free of the station's gravity well, Stephen pushed the engines to their limit. The ship shuddered under the strain, but held together as they made the jump to hyperspace. Once safely away, Stephen turned to Raya. Her skin was pale, and her breathing labored. He could feel the excess energy coursing through both their bodies, threatening to tear them apart from the inside. "We need to stabilize," he said, reaching for her hand. As their fingers intertwined, a visible current of energy flowed between them. Stephen focused on channeling the power, distributing it evenly between them. Slowly, the pain began to subside. Their breathing steadied, and the glow of their skin dimmed to a subtle shimmer. But even as they regained control, Stephen could feel that something fundamental had changed within them. The ship's sensors beeped, indicating they were approaching Allied space. Stephen sent out an encrypted distress signal, hoping it would reach Admiral Blackwood. As the stealth ship emerged from hyperspace near the Allied base, alarms blared throughout the command center. Admiral Blackwood, who had been anxiously awaiting news of the mission, sprang into action. "Get a medical team to the landing bay immediately," she ordered, her voice sharp with concern. The ship touched down moments later, its hull scorched and systems strained from the intense escape. Dr. Vex and her team rushed aboard, their expressions grim as they assess Stephen and Raya's condition. "Their energy levels are off the charts," Dr. Vex reported, her eyes widening at the readings on her scanner. "We need to get them to the advanced medical facility now." Stephen and Raya were quickly transferred to the medical wing, where Dr. Vex and her team worked tirelessly to stabilize their condition. Hours passed in tense silence as the medical staff monitored their vital signs and energy fluctuations. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Stephen's eyes fluttered open. He immediately reached for Raya, who lay in the adjacent bed. As their hands touched, a visible ripple of energy flowed between them, and Raya's eyes opened as well. Dr. Vex approached cautiously, her face a mixture of relief and fascination. "How do you feel?" she asked. Stephen sat up slowly, taking stock of his body. "Different," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Stronger, but changed." Raya nodded in agreement, her eyes meeting Stephen's. In that moment, they both realized the extent of their transformation. Their skin now had a subtle, shimmering quality, and their eyes glowed with an inner light that pulsed in perfect synchronization with each other's heartbeats. Admiral Blackwood entered the room, her posture rigid with anticipation. "Welcome back," she said, her voice softening slightly. "We have much to discuss." Over the next few hours, Stephen and Raya recounted their mission to the Admiral and the Allied leadership. They described the Concordat's advanced hybrid soldiers, the Central Data Core, and the mysterious Project Nexus they had uncovered. As they spoke, Allied strategists pored over the intelligence they had gathered, immediately formulating plans to counter the Concordat's next moves. The information about fleet movements alone was invaluable, but it was the mention of Project Nexus that truly captured everyone's attention. Dr. Thorne, who had been analyzing the data from the couple's mission, burst into the room, his face pale with shock. "Admiral," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "you need to see this." He quickly brought up a series of complex diagrams and data streams on the room's main display. "The Nexus project," he explained, his words tumbling out in a rush. "It's not just another weapon. It's an attempt by the Concordat to artificially replicate the Precursor hybridization process on a massive scale." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. If successful, the Nexus project would allow the Concordat to create an army of hybrid soldiers with abilities similar to Stephen and Raya's, an army that could tip the balance of the war irreversibly in their favor. Admiral Blackwood's expression hardened as she processed this information. She turned to Stephen and Raya, her eyes blazing with drive. "We need to strike now, before the Concordat can bring this project to fruition," she said. "And we need you two to lead the assault." Stephen and Raya exchanged a look, their newly enhanced connection allowing them to communicate volumes without a word. They turned back to the Admiral, their faces set with determination. "We'll do it," Stephen said, "but on one condition." Admiral Blackwood raised an eyebrow. "And what's that?" Raya leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with a mix of persistence and calculated risk. "We don't just destroy the Nexus project," she said. "We subvert it, use our connection to the Precursor technology to turn their own weapon against them." A murmur of surprise and excitement rippled through the room. Admiral Blackwood considered the proposal for a moment, then nodded. "It's risky," she admitted, "but if we can pull it off, it could end this war once and for all." With the decision made, the Allied forces threw themselves into preparation for the final battle. Stephen and Raya worked closely with Dr. Thorne and Dr. Vex, refining their abilities and developing new strategies for interfacing with Concordat technology. As the days passed, the Allied fleet assembled, incorporating reverse-engineered Concordat tech and Precursor-derived enhancements. The atmosphere was charged with a mixture of tension and hope. Everyone knew that this would be the decisive engagement that would determine the fate of the war. Finally, after a week of intense preparation, the Allied fleet was ready. As they prepared to depart, Stephen and Raya stood on the bridge of the flagship, their hands clasped tightly together. They could feel the weight of expectation on their shoulders, but also the strength of their bond and their newly evolved abilities. Admiral Blackwood approached them, her face set in iron will. "Are you ready?" she asked. Stephen and Ryan nodded in unison, their eyes glowing with inner light. "We're ready," Stephen said, his voice steady and confident. With a nod from the Admiral, the fleet engaged its engines, launching into hyperspace towards the Concordat stronghold. As the stars blurred around them, Stephen and Raya shared a final look of understanding. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, their bond stronger than ever before. The Allied fleet emerged from hyperspace on the outskirts of the Concordat-controlled system, immediately met by a swarm of enemy ships. The space around them erupted into chaos as both sides opened fire, energy beams and missiles crisscrossing the void between the opposing forces.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.